Well, Paul, it's another Chef's Manifesto event organised with Omved Gardens. It's great to be here again. We've been doing this for, well, is it nearly 4 years? It's been a long time, the Chef's Manifestos. It's slowly birthed gone around the world. It's fantastic to be here on another Chef's Manifesto event. How are you doing, Paul?
I think it's been almost 3 years since we started Chef's Manifesto. It kind of launched in Stockholm. Then we had our first action hub in London. The official one after we'd launched was about 3 years ago last week, I think. So we're literally 3 years on. So you look younger again, though.
Oh, no, it's just I managed to get some sleep last night. Well, we are on an unbelievable day of content today. We've got 3 hours. Hopefully everyone can stick with us for those 3 hours. Today we're talking about how we can feed all children better. And this is a virtual Chef's Manifesto Action Hub event. It's hosted by Omved Gardens. But we're focusing on the United Nations Food Systems Summit 2021 Action Track 1, which is access to safe and nutritious food for all. Yes. Paul, maybe you could give us a quick intro on what the Food Systems Summit actually is and why we're focusing on it, and then I'll give what we're focusing on today, and then we'll run in and introduce our first speaker.
Yeah, thanks, Arthur. So just over almost a year and a bit ago now, the Secretary General called for a UN Food Systems Summit. And so this is the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who asked to host a high-level summit around food systems. And this was to look at how food systems can contribute to the achievement of the 17 SDGs. And so looking at not just a food summit, but a food system summit, I think is really critical because it acknowledges that food is part of a system. And that involves many different actors and many different contributions to both the challenges and also the opportunities that the food system can enable. And so it's really, this conversation was started and for the past year, there's been dialogues happening, there's been events happening, there's been conversations happening, there's been people working on science, on the action tracks, as you mentioned, Arthur, creating these dialogues to feed into that. I was on a call this morning talking just about how many dialogues there've been. And there's, I think, over 700 independent dialogues, 136 member state dialogues that are happening at the moment and growing. And these dialogues are continuing. There's several a day at the moment. And so this is just showing the momentum, the importance of food systems for achieving many of the challenges we face in the world, not just in our food, but also around our climate, around biodiversity loss, around all these kinds of areas. And, somebody was telling me that there's a lot of issues around weather at the moment in different parts of the world in terms of heat waves and all this kind of stuff. And it's, the planet's changing. And so this is all kind of connected. But it's also our ability to, education we're talking about today. And, education is one of the 17 goals. And it ties back to food systems as well. If you don't have the right nutrients, you can't concentrate in school. You can't bring your best. As you said just now, Arthur, you had a good night's sleep, and all of a sudden it means you're going to have a good day. And that's because how our bodies are, the sleep we get, the nutrients we get, the energy we get is all critical for our ability to learn, to be present, to bring our best to so many things. And so the Food Systems Summit's a great opportunity. It's going to have a pre-summit in the end of July in Rome. And then that's going to be followed by the summit itself, the high-level summit in New York in late September. And so these moments are kind of building almost like a little bit of the team use a bit of the analogy of a cake, that, the cake's being baked in Rome and then it's going to be iced in New York. The idea of trying to kind of bring in all these contributions and really drive them towards really solutions. And it's been designed as a people summit, so with lots of ability for people to get involved. And that includes chefs. And so it's really great to have so many chefs here. I wonder, Arthur, whether it's good if in the chat, if people haven't, I saw Connor's already shared, but it might be good for people just to do a shout out of where they're dialing in from. I can see Connor's there from Ireland, but if you want to put in where you're dialing in from into the chat, you can do that and just do it to panelists and attendees. Good to see Kim from London, others that are dialing in. Just put in where you're from, and that would be great just for us to get to know who's on the call.
And just before,
so Arthur, oh yeah, sorry, go Arthur.
Just before, Paul, we run into our first guest speaker, it's interesting, the Chefs Manifesto over 3.5 years has really focused on the 8 manifesto points that were created by chefs from all over the world, but it's been very interesting to tie into the action tracks of the Food System Summit. And so not only are we running on 8 manifesto themes, but also the 5 action tracks from the Food System Summit. So there's a real kind of galvanizing, heading down this sort of super highway of information and support and connection.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There is a lot of that connection, and so I mean, it's thinking about within the action tracks, there's just lots of different threads and themes, and they all are designed to kind of converge solutions. And they've had a process over the last 6 months with over 500 people involved in different ways, helping kind of develop these different solutions into these action tracks. And the action tracks provide kind of a framework for the high level themes that are going to kind of come out of the summit. And so us talking about action track 1 and really looking at the issues involved in it, and then dialoguing around that, obviously nutritious food and enough food is key. And so this is really critical to bring into the conversation, and how some of that plays out is through education in schools. And so this is why, we're focused in where we are.
Right. So very quickly, the event focus is that, there is a triple burden of malnutrition, both undernutrition, hidden hunger, and overweight and obesity threatens the survival, growth, and development of children and young people worldwide. Well-nourished children are better able to grow and learn, to participate in their communities, and to be resilient in the face of disease, disaster, and other emergencies. And so the following areas have been identified by the scientific group for Action Track 1 for the Food System Summit in order to put children's nutrition rights first. These points are that we need to empower families, children, young people, and women to demand affordable, nutritious food. We need to drive food suppliers to do the right thing for children, build healthy food environments for all children, mobilize supportive systems to scale up the nutrition results for every child, and then collect, analyze, and use good quality data and evidence regularly to guide action and track progress. This requires building cooperation among many different stakeholders. Cooperation, Paul, that we just discussed here, even the Manifesto and the Food System Summit, is a really strong connection. And this needs to happen across all countries. And we're really, really privileged and excited to invite Professor Donald Bundy to give us a very kind of clear opening gambit as to actually what we're discussing today, and Donald's experience on a global nature and also a local nature. Donald, thank you so much for joining us. I wonder if we could both get you your camera running and your sound on. And Donald, it's been a really interesting, probably 18 months, because both from a Brexit perspective in the UK, but also the pandemic hitting the world, things have really changed, haven't they? And that's a question I'll ask you once you've been able to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do, Donald. We've got about 15 minutes to talk things through, but Donald, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Chefs Manifesto event, and perhaps you could let everybody know who's joined us, just what it is that you do and some of your thoughts.
Sure, I'm happy to do that, Arthur, and good to connect with Paul. And I'm particularly pleased to hear Paul talking about the Food System Summit. And one of the messages I really want to share is that the effect of COVID, a big consequence of COVID, it brought about a real movement around a school meals coalition. There's more than 50 countries, more than 15 agencies are already signing up to this to take to the Food System Summit to actually create a structure going forward to address the needs of children. The closure of schools has had a dramatic influence on how people have visualized the role of school meals and recognize the role of food. And the push there, by the way, is to feed 440 million children, 440 more children by 2022, and that the what absolutely strikes me in reading about your organization and listening to you folks is that you have a unique message and a unique organization that should be part of that coalition. Your voice around healthy food, climate sensitive food, sustainable food, the ideas of establishing lifelong healthy dietary preferences, the pushing of learning outcomes, those are all the messages that are within this area, and they're messages that you very clearly can get behind, and you have a credibility that other people don't have to get behind that. So that's absolutely where I hope we can go with the discussion today. But you asked me to talk a little bit about me, a little history then. First 20 years of my academic life, I was an academic, Imperial College. I was a professor at Oxford University, and I really focused on the recognition that while survival of children was vitally important, and we need to invest in the first few years of life, the first 1,000 days, as people put it, actually what's also really important, what's crucial, is the next 7,000 days. The first 8,000 days of life take you up to age of 20. Those are your crucial years. Those are what establish you as an adult. And all your skills and knowledges and behaviors occur then. And it's been extraordinary how people have overlooked that as a period, yet it is crucial. It's exactly when we invest in learning, and it's exactly, of course, when we invest in school meals. That food is so vital in that period. So for 20 years, I worked on those areas. Then I was recruited by the World Bank. Jim Wolfenson was the incoming president of the bank and wanted to invest more in what we've come to call human capital. So not just financial capital, but human capital, the value of people. I went there as a fellow to help set it up, but I ended up spending 15 years at the bank and working with 75 governments actually during that period about how do you invest in children in those first 8,000 days of life? What are the important things? After that, I was a senior advisor to the Gates Foundation and in London to the Children's Investment Foundation. But why really I'm here is that I've been asked to create a research consortium, which we launched 2 weeks ago, a global research consortium for school health and nutrition. And it's precisely around the kinds of ideas that I know that all of you people on this call have been engaged in. It's precisely those ideas that we want to pursue. A research consortium that's independent of donors, independent of the UN agencies, much as we love them, but to give us that ability to speak freely. And a research consortium that's very much focused in the South, although its secretariat is based in the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, the whole structure is based around global communities of practice. And I'm hoping some of you may be interested in being part of that. Arthur, yesterday when we were talking, I mentioned that this idea of human capital, that in rich countries, some 70% of the wealth of our rich countries comes from the work of people, the direct activities of people, whereas in countries that are under-resourced, it's often only 30%, 70% in rich countries, 30% in those that have less resources, which means not only do the countries not do well, it also means, and this is much more tragic, I feel, that people don't do well. People don't realize their potential. People don't get fed and looked after during those years of learning. That's an absolutely crucial thing. And I think that your organization, the whole idea of the Chef Manifesto is about changing that. And that's also, I think, that's certainly the goal of the research consortium, and it's also the goal of that larger coalition. So I'm hoping that as a result of our conversations today, there'll be an interest from the group in signing up to be part of that coalition. And I want to emphasize that this isn't about money. The reality is that in January 2020, before COVID struck, 90% of the funds for school meals programs globally, 90% were domestic funds. These are not programs that are hugely reliant on external support. They're domestic programs, just as they are in our own countries. In fact, recently, the president of France, in tweeting about this, he does it as well apparently, in tweeting about the coalition, said everybody needs to join this coalition. He said that for France, this is a key issue within France. It's a national issue, and in the UK we've seen that with Marcus Rashford's interaction with the Prime Minister on this. It's a national issue, but it's also an international issue. This is what determines the future of the world, and so. I think that your kind of group here, where you do think both locally and internationally, is exactly the kind of the kind of basis for thinking about these issues.
Well, Donald, just a few points that we did discuss yesterday. It was so fascinating to talk to you yesterday. Some really interesting points came out of it, and one of them was about understanding the importance of health on nutrition, and why healthy children, even before they eat a meal, need to, their tummies need to be healthy, their minds need to be healthy, their bodies need to be healthy, because, when you're putting food in, if your body's not healthy, you can't extract the nutrition from the food you're eating. Now, how did you focus on that? Because there was some parasitic work you did, wasn't there, in children global? Because this isn't just a local thing in London. This is not just a UK, this is a global narrative.
Sure, that's absolutely. So the worm story is, I think, one of the most clearly illustrates or all of this. Any of us who've lived abroad for any period of time and under stressful circumstances will have been infected with intestinal worms. This is the commonest infection in the world, commonest chronic infection in the world. And people say, well, let's feed the children, not the worms. You can't do school meals if you're not also deworming the children. Thank goodness there is a whole movement around that, and actually enormous pharmaceutical donations to help that happen. But I think it's a bigger point that you're really making here, so when we say school meals, we don't just mean school meals. We mean school health and nutrition. We mean a collection of activities that need to happen in order for children to grow up. I go back to that 7,000 days. First 1,000 days are the 9 months of pregnancy plus the first 2 years of life. It's absolutely vital. Those are crucial years. We have to invest in that. But what we've not been doing is then investing in the next part. And yet it's actually your manifesto, right? This is the investment in school-age children and adolescents. And for them, we need to have food, and I don't need to tell you anything about food. But we also need to invest in their basic health during that period. And in some settings, there are significant healthcare issues, and that are only addressed, in fact, through the school systems. That's the only way that children in resource poor countries, particularly rural children, that's the only healthcare contact that they ever get.
And it's important, isn't it, that there's obviously a reason that children need to be well nourished during the times that they're learning, because otherwise they're not learning. I mean, is there any kind of findings or thoughts that you have on that?
Sure. So this is, it is an interesting paradox. Here we have the idea of learning, the idea of free universal education is a global idea. There's literally no country against that. And yet some people could say it's a sort of socialist or progressive idea to give something free in that way. And yet every country provides free universal basic education to their children. And yet while they're providing that we aren't caring about the health of the learner. So we recognize there's a learning crisis that we need to worry about, providing teachers and providing schools, but we're not investing in the learner in the same way as we're investing in the learning. And that's, I think, again, this is a very important point about how we think about what school meals, school health and nutrition can do to ensure that a young person growing up is so well protected. And I want to particularly emphasize, we don't pay any particular attention to health around puberty. And yet all of us know personally how dramatic and traumatic the changes are during, in early adolescence around puberty, where your growth rate is as fast as it was when you were 2. It's a sudden dramatic change in your biomass, and yet we don't pay any particular attention to that. It's just an extraordinary example of how we invest a lot in learning around that period, but we don't invest a lot in the learner at that time.
And it's interesting, there's a few points we need to make before we have to jump off because we've got a packed schedule. But
of course.
There was a point we made yesterday about non-communicable diseases, how the foundations in early failures of diet, because we will be covering it a little bit later about, people aged 40 are struggling desperately in the chronic illness, and you go to the 30s into 20s and they form poor food habits in their teenage years and as children. And this is having a massive effect on so many different countries.
Yes, absolutely, that's right. And you mentioned earlier on the double or triple burden of malnutrition that we talk about nowadays. So there still is real hunger. Hunger still stalks the earth. It's still a huge issue. But there's also this issue of overweight and obesity that's emerging absolutely everywhere. In fact, it's growing fastest in the poorest countries. The rates of obesity are rising fastest in the poorest countries because of course they start from a lower place. And what's the importance of that? Well, it isn't simply about being a child that's overweight. It's about becoming an adult who has always been overweight. And we know that in this country very clearly that that's a huge burden of disease that starts to come in the 30s and the 40s as people start to show the consequences of overweight at earlier stages. You don't fix this by changing your behavior when you're 40. You fix this by ensuring that the behaviors that children learn in school and learn in those 7,000 days are the ones they carry forward into adulthood. So you're absolutely right. It's a hugely important issue. Interestingly, we're doing quite a lot of work with in Southern Africa, in the countries of Southern Africa, and the focus there of governments. Yes, it's on their children, but they're also now saying, the cost of non-communicable disease in adults is one of our biggest health costs. If we can find a way of avoiding that, that'll pay for all of our school feeding programs. It's a fascinating formula.
No, it is. A whole conversation is fascinating, Donald. Just a final point, which I thought was really poignant yesterday, and we'll end on this, is that there has been this concept of food aid and how food aid around the world has been required to keep people fed. But your point yesterday, Donald, about that needs to change and it should become nutrition aid. Would you like to touch on that point before we sign off?
Sure, and I mean, it's a great point to move on from, because it's exactly where you folks are in your thinking. That's what's new about that's what you bring to this. Historically, people talk about food aid and they think about the hungry children. Vitally important. We can't have hungry children. They think about providing any food to anywhere is, a good. That's a good thing to do. But of course, what we realize it isn't. We realize that the food, you need to provide food that's locally appropriate, that people will like, and that will set behaviors that are then positive throughout their lives. You need to be thinking about food that's environmentally sensitive in these days. It needs to be sustainable. You can't rely on food being shipped in the long term. So you need to be much more sensitive to thinking about what the food is, what are the characteristics of the food, what's the interaction between the people and the food. So the old food aid of just, let's get anything there, that, anything's better than nothing, that has to move and is moving, but it needs to be replaced by a really much more intellectual approach, which I think you as a group personify.
Thank you, Donald. We're going to move on. If you could join us for the rest of the day, or for as long as you can, it'd be wonderful, because if you have any points to anybody's statements, please put your hand up and maybe make a point, or if anyone wants to ask Donald a question through their panels, please lean on Donald. It's wonderful to have you a part of our day-to-day. Now, I was very lucky to interview Elia Martinez, who is the program officer, head of program for El Salvador and the World Food Programme. And Elia's got a lovely story that we wanted to share with you. We're just going to run a video because it's very early in El Salvador. Elia might be joining us at some point, but for now we're going to run a video. It's about 15 minutes long, so stick with us. I recorded it last week, but this is Elia Martinez in El Salvador, the head of program for the World Food Programme. If we could run the video, that'd be appreciated.
Okay, hi Arthur, hello everybody, and welcome to El Salvador. El Salvador is a really small country, but it's a beautiful, beautiful country. You can go to the mountain and to the sea at the same time, the same day. So it's a really, you're welcome to come to El Salvador. Right now, we are just starting the rainy season. And this is a really important season in El Salvador because we have a lot of fruit, a different type of fruit, mangoes, popotes, mandarinas, orange, different type of orange. So it's a really important season in El Salvador, but also it's also important because all the agriculture is just starting to plant the maize, the beans, that is the base of our food. Now when we go to the market, it's a really splendid, a lot of colors of different type of vegetables, fruits. It's really nice to go to the market, but it is important to have the money for going to the market. And sometimes, for many people, to have access to those fruits, to those vegetables are not affordable. So even though we have a rich country with a lot of food, with a lot of fruits, sometimes it's really difficult to have access for that.
So now probably then with all of the food that's been grown through the summer and is now available, there's a lot of nutrition inside it, lots of natural sugars, lots of vitamins, lots of minerals. But obviously not everybody has access to this, important food sources. Elia, I wonder if we could dig a little deeper into your experience of El Salvador because, we've been talking a little bit about your experience in El Salvador. And, you grew up through difficult times. Could you share with us your personal experience of growing up in El Salvador, nutrition focused foods, speaking of?
Sure. Well, I was born in a small town in the east of El Salvador. In the decade of 80s, there was a civil war in El Salvador, and I was just a kid. At that time, I realized that I was part of the one of the program of the government supported by WFP. That's the school feeding program. At that time, I was a beneficiary. I received milk for those programs. And now I know that at that age, the rates of malnutrition, especially the stunting and anemia, were really high in El Salvador. At that time, have access to food was really difficult because for the civil war, we didn't could go to the different towns to go to food, to buy the food. So for our parents, it was a really difficult area that now is another type of problem, but at that time, that was the main problem in El Salvador.
So conflict was driving access or lack of access to food.
Exactly.
And
there's a conflict.
It doesn't seem like very much has changed. There's still flashpoints around the world where conflict drives hunger, famine, and destabilizes the whole food system. And that's something that you dealt with as you're the head of program for World Food Programme.
Yes.
What is it then that you do now to focus on nutrition, meals for children, but also nutrition across our Salvador?
Okay, the interesting thing of my personal life that I would like to know is that after that we moved to the capital city to look for a better opportunity for us. So my parents decided just to move from the town to the big city, just to give us the opportunity to go out. So I started to study nutrition, and now really I'm giving all my knowledge to improve the nutrition in El Salvador through the World Food Programme. Now, as a head of program, we are working with the government to support them to have a better political issue, but political means that we supported it to capacity strengthening, to have a very policies for nutrition, especially because we have a double burden of malnutrition in El Salvador with high rates of stunting, but also high rates of obesity. So especially with the school feeding program, we work with them to support them to have a better implementation program. Now the program is just implemented by the government, but it has to be improved to the different nutrition problems that we have affected, especially the obesity and also the anemia and the stunting.
So anemia and stunting obviously a very big issue with nutrition.
Yes, this is still an issue.
It's interesting that you say there that there's a relationship between what it is that you do and government, and you're sort of in some way advising the government and supporting the government to build nutrition to people's lives. So, how important is nutrition both for children and adults? Because you're saying that there's obesity, there's overweight, and there's a lack of nutrition. Sometimes people think, well, if I'm eating and I'm overweight, surely I've got nourishment, but that's not the case, is it?
So I couldn't hear you well. Could you repeat, please?
Only that, some people they're obese. People think, oh, they're eating too much food, but actually they're not eating the right amount of food, so they're not nutritionally supported in their diet.
Yes, and the main problem is that the double burden of malnutrition, the kids, for example, they just have access to the most cheaper food that in the case is not the most nutrition. So we have to help the government to be well prepared to educate all the population, the students, the parents are part of the schools to prepare the food that they have access, and also to prepare in a healthy way. Because as I told you at the beginning, we have a lot of fruits and a lot of vegetables, but we have to know the better way to prepare it, just to preserve the nutrients, the micronutrients, the vitamins, because in some cases they don't know how to prepare it. So we are supporting the government just to have a better nutrition program for the school feeding program.
So how do you go about, Elliot, making sure that in the future that these raw materials that are grown so brilliantly make it to the children's table, children's plate, and population in general? Because if the raw material is there, then does that mean that the infrastructure is not there to be able to get this food to people?
Okay, in that case, what we are trying to do with the government is to, there are different types of ones, to link the local purchase for the smallholder farmers. Is one of the things that we are promoting for them. And also to, in the different schools, to have small gardens where the students can plant their own vegetables, to learn about those, but also learn about all the micronutrients that the vegetables are, as also is a part of learning methodology in the schools, planting their local vegetable. So it's different type. And also we're trying to transforming the food, preparing a different type of product with the local growth. For example, mixing rice with sorghum, we can prepare a beverage that has a better nutrition status and tastes really good to help them. But another important thing is that to take in account the opinion of the students, because we want them to eat that, and we want to know if they like or don't like the beverage that we're preparing. So it's a work that all the community has to work with that. The students, the teacher, the parents, and also the agriculture, because although we are part of the food system, and this is the link of food system with the food, especially with the school feeding program, that we will have to link it all the involved in the food systems.
So it sounds like the community really needs to be consulted as to, because even the local in South Africa probably have a different diet and nutrition. Is that something that you're working with, consulting communities?
Yes, yes, we consult the community is part of our work, and also with this transformation of the beverage we are doing with the schools, we consult the different communities in the different regions of El Salvador. even though El Salvador is a really small country, we have a different type of food in different areas. So we'll consult them because I was living in the east of El Salvador. We have a different culture, eating culture, and we are not accustomed to eat the West culture in El Salvador. So we consult them to adapt the food and to make them available and acceptable for the community and especially for the students and the kids.
And so you talk a little bit about smallholder farmers, small farms that are working on them. Maybe they're self-owned and but as the agricultural systems within our Salvador mature and perhaps get better at producing the materials, or at least capturing the raw materials and getting it to the markets, how important is it for the agricultural systems to be connected to the school meals in El Salvador? Is there a connection between agriculture and school food?
Yes, there is a connection, but right now it's a really small connection. We have to improve it because for the civil war, a lot of migrants went to the different countries, and now El Salvador import a lot of food. Instead, we produce them. So we have to promote the local producers, but to promote it, we have to incentivize the community to let them know or to know that sometimes we have to back to the basics with them because they don't know sometimes about our culture because the war really affected that. So it's part of our work. We have to improve that link between the local producer and the school meals. But it has to be really, we have to involve a different stakeholders and also the private sector. Because the private sector, if we link the local producer with the private sector, we know that the producer can be big growth because for them alone it was not possible. So there's a lot of work to do, but I think we are in the right way to support them and to link the different stakeholders just to improve the nutrition through the local agriculture, through the nutrition, through the preparation. I think we are in the right way right now.
And what about fortification foods in El Salvador? Is there micronutrients that need to go into the diet, or is there a fortification program in El Salvador?
Yes, there is. El Salvador has a law that the sugar is fortified with vitamin A because at that time, in the 80s, the vitamin A deficiencies were really high. So now it is not, but the sugar is still fortified. And also for especially the school programs, we try to improve a special nutrition food, especially for those communities with the high rates of malnutrition. In that case, we fortify the beverage just to improve the nutrition for the kids, especially in those areas. And also we have the salt fortified with yodo. So with the high rates of deficit of yodo at that time. So I think the fortification in this area is really important in different states of the products that is highly consumed by the community. Sugar, rice, and sugar, salt, and flour.
All of them fortified for
yes.
reasons. So when it comes to food, when it comes to growing food, obviously water is probably the biggest point apart from soil and sun. Now, water, what type of access to water do the farmers in El Salvador have? Are there issues around the scarcity of water? Because obviously water is vital for nutrition.
Yes, the water is also an issue. In this time, we have a lot of water because it's the rainy season, but we have also, El Salvador has a region affected by drought, so affect the growth in some communities. And also not only for production, but also affect for the consumers. The water is a really important issue that has to be raised, and also the government is trying to prepare, or they're preparing a law to protect water because water is an important issue for us. So, for example, and in some schools they don't have access to water, to safe water. So in this case, we work with other partners, as you said, to have the better way to to improve the access or in the schools, especially because they don't have access to water for drink or for beverage.
Earlier, I want to talk to you all day. We've got 3 hours, and we were trying to get as much as possible. But there's one more thing about hospital, because everyone has gone through the COVID-19. From a food security or from a school's food experience, how has the lockdown influenced, or have you been able to work with food with your schools, and has it added to food security this year?
Sorry, could you repeat?
Oh, okay. So during lockdown, school meals were not just a way of getting food to people, but it was also about food security.
Yes. During the lockdown was really difficult. Also, those days of the school, not all the schools are really opened. So at that case, the program has to be adapted. And all the school meal was delivered in the community most affected by the lockdown, and that they don't have access to go to the market to have access to food. It was not possible to give food for all the schools, because we have to target, we help the government to target the most affected municipalities for the lockdown. And at that time, the government and the community realized the importance of the school meal program, because in some cases, the school meal programs is the food that the kids receive once a day. And due to the lockdown, some students, they didn't have access to food because they didn't go to the school. So now we know that more than 1 million Salvadorians are in food insecure due to the COVID. So now is this type of program take a really relevant importance to improve them, to improve the efficiency of the program, because we have to deliver the right food at the right moment in those populations, especially the most far from the main cities.
Elia Martinez, the program for the World Food Program in El Salvador. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us some of your experiences. It's amazing to see that you were connected to the World Food Program, school feeding program as a child. Because of the civil war and stuff, forced into that program, conflict created under the issues of food security. And now you're head of program in nutrition in El Salvador. It's just so fantastic, isn't it? I mean, it must be an amazing experience for you to be living that.
Yeah, thanks. I'm really happy to do what I do, and I know that every time I woke up, I just think about that, and I know that I'm the right place to deliver what I really love, is the nutrition for the population. That's what I was born for.
Elia, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to speak to you soon. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Wow, it was quite painful to get that connection. Something was wrong with my connection. I hope you all picked up on what Elia was saying, the importance of nutrition and what the school feeding program did for food security during COVID. And some children did not have any food apart from the school meals that were provided. And you know, that's quite a serious point to make, is that the school food created a secure environment for children to be eating in El Salvador. So really, water also essential, and both fortification food, but also nutrition, a real focus in El Salvador. Paul, before we move on, did you pick up anything from Elia's points there, and anything that we should think through?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that it reminds me of, and it's that point you just talked about the school meals can sometimes, when communities are vulnerable and when there's pressure economically or societally or due to conflict, sometimes, it's very easy to keep kids home because parents are struggling to make ends meet and to do things. But I do know school feeding programs, parents ultimately want their kids to thrive. And, if there's a school feeding program, it sometimes can be that extra push to get their kids across to school. And sometimes it's the only meal they get during the day. I know I've seen that in East Africa, in different parts, in Latin America. And so I do think that, you know, as we've just been through this COVID crisis, I think that's a really interesting point. And I think, you know, what Don was talking about, this investing in the learning but not the learner, I think we need to see this connection. And I think one of the things about the Food System Summit is really also thinking about is those interconnections. But I think, you know, seeing people as people and looking at where those investments are, but also the nutritional level of those interventions. And I think that was really, really profound how she talked about that and some of the different ways that that was being done. So it's great to already be off to a cracking start in terms of some of the stories and the narrative. And I think, Arthur, one of the things just to remember is, you know, in the Chef's Manifesto, we talk about in the different goals, but there's one that's around, you know, accessible, nutritious and affordable food. And I think this is something that really is important for us to always keep front of mind in the work that we're doing, is how, you know, we're working on all kinds of different creations sometimes and different challenges, but how we also look at that accessibility, and school feeding is one way to do that. So it's good. But I think we've got a lot more to dive into.
El Salvador, we're going back across the planet to the Philippines. We have Leandro Cano joining us, who's representing Act for Food, Act for Change. Jim's going to tell us a little bit about himself, as well as Kath Elliston here in London, who works with the Jamie Oliver Group and is a serious advocate for change. And Kath's also going to tell us a little bit about what she's doing. And then we're going to kind of open up a discussion for the next 20, 25 minutes about advocacy, agriculture, tech, and how we can generate change. So hi to Kath and hi to Jim. Have you got videos and sound? Let's have a listen to you.
Hi, Arthur.
Hi, Kath. Can we have a video of you? You got your video on?
I can see both of them and I can hear them both, Arthur.
Well, that's interesting. Okay. Okay, I can see Kath. And hello to you both. Thank you for joining us. Okay, well, look, we're going to start this off. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about yourself, but the title of this next panel, which is going to run for 25 minutes or so, is what is the food system and how can we get it by 2030, and what kind of advocacy do we need to do to make change? And Jim, your point about the nutrition-centric agricultural systems and the advocacy work you can do both locally and nationally. And I thought that the two of you could really get a healthy conversation going. But first of all, Kath, tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is you do.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today with such wonderful speakers. I feel like I've already learned a lot. I'm Kath. I head up the campaigning at the Jamie Oliver Group. And I'm also very privileged to work closely with a charity that Jamie has co-founded called Bite Back 2030. And if you haven't heard of them, they are a youth-led movement who are fighting for a fairer and healthier food system, which I know pretty much everyone on this call is as well. So I don't know, Arthur, if you want me to introduce some of their work now, or should we save that for later?
Let's run that video, and we'll come to Jim in a second. But yeah, let's run that video. I think this is a really good introduction to this to Bite Back.
Well, this video that you're just about to see is an example of a campaign that we did earlier this year, and one of the key things that we focus on at the Jamie Oliver Group and Bite Back is how we really bring the public along and how we demonstrate to the government that the public do support measures to improve children's health here in the UK. So this is an example of a campaign video that we did earlier this year called Boris, Keep Your Promise.
This is a message for the Prime Minister. Hi, Boris.
Hello, Boris.
Mr. Prime Minister, in the last 12 months,
We've done exactly what you told us.
I feel like I missed a year of my life. I lost control over my education.
I haven't been able to play sports. I've really missed football.
I don't know, I missed all of it.
Missing Christmas with my family was heartbreaking.
I'm 18 this year, and it feels like I only just turned 16. We have kept Our promise.
To protect the whole nation's health.
Now, Prime Minister.
Please keep your promise.
To protect ours.
You said we would be properly fed at school.
You said you would stop the bombardment of junk food ads.
You said you would promote healthier food.
You said you would label all food.
So we know what we're really eating.
You promised to protect our health.
Please.
Please do it. Now.
Please, go to Bite Back 2030 right now and sign the letter.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Kath. It's great to see Jamie on the warpath. He's always been a brilliant advocate for change. That's really poignant in as much that children are coming up out of a very difficult time. And Donald's point earlier on that building back better and getting these school meals back. There's even more children who are not getting their school meals. The numbers are staggering. We've got 73 million children without school meals. And then there was, I think, another 400 million who missed out on school meals over time. So, these numbers are huge. And so we definitely need to be doing it both in the UK and abroad. And we'll look at advocacy, Kath, and how changes we can make. Hi, Jim. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that you've been working really hard on this too. Jim, tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is you do, and then we'll open up this discussion.
Hi, Arthur. Hi, everyone else. It's nice to be here. Thank you very much for having me. I'm Jim. I currently am part of the Act for Change, Act for Food campaign that is in support of good food for all with Paul here and also for the UN Food System Summit. So the Act for Change campaign really is a list of different actions that young people are calling for food systems, stakeholders, member states, private sector, civil society, academia, and everybody else involved really. And looking at the kind of items, or at least themes, thematic areas that young people want to see change within the food system that they're going to be living in by 2030. And so this is a campaign that that went through a consultative process at the start of the year, asking young people from around the world different kinds of what they want to see in their food system. And so that has been compiled and compressed into 17 thematic areas, which you could access to at actionsforchange.org. And it's also in parallel with actionsforfood.org. On the other hand, I do on a day-to-day job, basically, I lead an agri-tech department and an IT company working on IT solutions for agriculture. And some other hats related to policy advocacy is being a chair of the Youth Alliance for Zero Hunger that works closely with the Rome-based agencies for youth engagement. So maybe I could keep it at that, and that would spring us off to a bit more discussions then.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Jim. And I must point out that Jim has been fabulous in joining us, because I get a little bird tells me, Jim, that you were just married. Were you married 2 days ago? Is this your honeymoon?
Over the weekend, actually.
I don't think we've ever had anyone spend their honeymoon with us. So congratulations on your wedding, Jim. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm glad to join in your honeymoon. So Jim and Kath, sounds like there's some really strong advocacy going on here, both at a local level in London, Kath, and Jim, the work that you're doing. But, Bite Back, Act for Change, these are really strong statements. And it does feel like that there is the opportunity to advocate for change and drive policy change. Kath, would you like to just dig into to us to let us know the fact that does advocacy work, does pushing the right buttons work? Because I know that you've pressurised Sadiq Khan in London on a number of changes to the food policies in London and the UK. Can you run through a little bit of that about the successes of advocacy?
Of course, yeah. I mean, I'm a big believer that advocacy works. Otherwise, many of us wouldn't be in the job. And I think when you can prove that the public really care about something and you can mobilize them, often strategically, so often when you have unique voices who are affected by this issue speaking out, that's really powerful. And I think that the work Jim's doing with Act for Youth is a really great example of that. But also when you kind of rally large numbers of the public behind one thing. And I guess an example of that was when we did the love letter to London. I don't know if anyone saw this in, I think it was 2016, so quite a long time ago now. But basically the idea of that was Jamie wrote a love letter to London. He said, look, I absolutely love this city. I love the incredible food culture that it has. But how is it that in, let's say, Dulwich, you can walk 10 minutes down the road into Peckham and child obesity rates are twice as high? You know, this is a city of, you know, profound inequality. And Sadiq, I'm calling on you to really do everything that you can, everything in your power to change that and to make sure that every young person has access to decent, nutritious food, no matter where they live. So we got lots of people to sign the letter. We used the hashtag Love Letter for London. I think the fact that it wasn't just a list of policy asks and that it was kind of in this nicely designed, almost brand of a love letter, I think that helped make it really resonate. So yeah, it was brilliant. Sadiq, off the back of that, and also with the alongside the work of loads of amazing organizations who were campaigning for the same thing with us, many of whom I'm sure are on this call, Sadiq decided to take all junk food adverts off Transport for London, which was just an amazing win, especially given that Transport for London is actually the biggest advertising estate in the world. So that was to make sure that the messages that kids see on their way to school as they're making their way around this city were not pushing them towards less healthy options. So it was a huge win.
Yeah, and Jim, can you tell us a little bit about your experience? Because, you know, acting for change, driving for different food systems to give better nutrition to young people, to school children and adolescents. Can you share us a little bit about your experiences and what you've come across?
Yeah, so coming from my previous experience in university work, you know, where I taught, we ran a program in our institute on, you know, doing a school and home garden. I think one of the things is that, at least coming from a background in agriculture, really, is that there somehow seems to be a disconnect with agriculture discussions and nutrition discussions. And so here's a group of people talking about the kind of nutrition that young people, especially in our context of discussion here, is the kind of nutrition that young people need to have, you know, to grow and, you know, consume so that they can develop into, you know, healthy people that can be effective in society and all that. But then there's also somehow that drive towards, you know, producing more of specific types of crops, but not necessarily linked to the kind of food that these children or, you know, next generations need to eat. So somehow there is a gap in that discussion there, and there's a space somewhere there, or there is a black box somewhere there that somehow we all have to muddle through. And I feel like everybody has to find their way around that. And true enough, like what Kath was just saying about advocacy work is crucial, is that how do we paint the picture and bridge that gap between nutrition, the need for healthy food, safe and nutritious food of society, and also linking it back to the source of all these food materials, you know. And so I feel like that's where, for me, coming from my experience, or at least what I really focused on, has been on supply chains. And I feel like that's where the discussion on agriculture, production and agricultural processing and all of those, that area of the supply chain has to work closely and has to be sensitive towards the needs of society in terms of nutrition. And I feel like that's something that has to be focused on, especially what considering what young people would want to see in their own, food system. And we do see a trend, like, like from that bite back video that Kath shared with us, you can see that young people really are, they are not ignorant, they're not naive, they do know what they want. And it's just, I think there's also that importance of making sure that young people are also made aware of the kind of options and choices that they can make within this kind of system. And so I feel like that's very crucial and important.
Yeah, is that something that Bite Back, and you're obviously looking at all of the things that Jim is saying here about the youth having a voice and wanting to make change for the food environments around them. Is that something that you're finding, and can you give us some of your experiences on that?
Yeah, I'm just nodding along at everything Jim's saying. Yeah, I mean, one thing that we're actually trying to do more is shift away from using the word choice to using the word options, because choice implies that young people and all of us actually have way more of a decision in what we eat than is actually the case. So the way that I look at it, and this is what behavioral science shows, is that there are all sorts of factors that influence what we eat, but three of the biggest ones are price, convenience or accessibility, and then attractiveness. And if you think about that as a triangle, the food that falls into the middle of that and that ticks all of those boxes tends to be less healthy, which is why it's absolutely vital that we have campaigns like Jim's and like Bite Back to make healthier food more affordable, more accessible, and more appealing. Because that way we'll have more options available to us, so that when you walk into that supermarket, the first thing that you see isn't the options that you have aren't going to be, cheap, less healthy, really convenient, attractive, unhealthy food. We're going to make more of those healthier options more accessible to people.
Nice. So choice is not the issue, it's options. And so, Jim, you probably work on those options, because if you're working in tech and looking at how to increase both nutrition in the food that's being grown, but also how to get that food to people, this is obviously a big goal that you've set yourself. And does that lean into what Kath is saying about making sure that the price is right, that it's still convenient, but it's also healthy and it's attractive?
I really like how this discussion is going, specifically because that triangle that Kath just pointed out to is one of the things that I've been, at least in the past 6 years, been really hoping to work on, and I've just been given the opportunity of of our company and a partnership with GS1, which is a global federation of supply chain and industry standards organization. And so what we're hoping to do and implement is a traceability solution where you're able to trace back the food that you're actually consuming. And that actually hits all the, the questions, the question marks, or the tick boxes that Kath was just talking about: the price, the quality of that food, or, what is the content of that food. And if we have those traceability solutions around the food in our world, and I would say it's a very, in a globalized way, because, much of what we eat comes from different parts of the world. What we see in the supermarkets, what we see, and the options that we see in all these stores really come from all parts of the world. And so having that traceability solution is not, of course, a silver bullet. It's one of the solutions that could help bring in transparency into supply chains, which is very crucial for consumers. When you create a system or an environment that allows consumers to look into the process or the journey of the food that they're actually eating, we're actually helping make consumers more educated, more giving them the power of an informed decision, right? So if you have options right before you that are right there, but you don't really know where this food comes from, you're somehow acting on giving that specific product a benefit of the doubt, just assuming that this is what it is as it says on the labels and all that. And so if we do have these kinds of traceability solutions, it's really crucial to have these kinds of transparency mechanisms across food supply chains that educates consumers, that promotes a specific level of industry standards across food processors, traders, on how they handle the food materials from the farm to the processing areas, to the warehouses, to the logistics, right before it gets to the table and to the fork. You get to create an environment where people would be more responsible in how they handle the food from all those parts of the chain.
Kath, industry standards?
Yeah, it's crucial. And I mean, I always remember my grandma saying that they only ate raspberries when they were in season. I remember saying to my grandma in like winter that I was eating some raspberries, and she was like, "What?" So I think that is just one example of how we have become so detached from the supply chains of the food that we eat, in some countries in specific ways, and where a solution like Jim is talking about would be really useful.
How do we then generate leverage? Because obviously we need to get better nutrition to children in schools and in home, and not just in both the Philippines and the UK, but globally. What is it that we need to be doing? So Bite Back is working towards a goal. Act for Food, Act for Change is working towards a goal. So we talk a little bit about these goals, what the vision for 2030 could be. Because the idea is that, we want to say to the UN Food System Summit, look, these are the things that we want to cover, and these are things that we want to say. So, let's say them now. Bite Back, Kath, what then really is the end goal, and what can we do to support it, and how does that lean into Jim? And maybe Jim, you can answer back to Kath.
So the specific goal that is at the heart of all the work that we do is halving child obesity by 2030. And that is a goal that the UK government have also got as part of their strategy.
So you're doing a partnership then? So they've got a strategy, you've got a strategy, you're working together, or is it separate and then agreeing? What's going on? We're
lobbying them to shape that strategy. So we lobbied them to adopt that target, which they did. And we know that there, as Jim puts it, there is no silver bullet. There is no one thing that is going to make children healthier. Advertising, restricting junk food advertising to kids is one thing that science shows would be immensely impactful. But it's not the whole picture, because we know if we restrict advertising on TV, what about online? What about when you walk into a store? What about when you're walking down the street and you're getting a bus to school and your bus ticket has a McDonald's advert on it? So advertising is one part. I think price promotions, clear labeling, but really it's kind of that triangle. It's any policy that makes healthier food more affordable, more accessible, and more appealing. And of course, school food is a huge part of that. Kids are eating at school 190 days a year. And Jamie's obviously been banging the drum on this for 20 years, but we know the work isn't done. We do have school food standards, but I think a recent study showed that 60% of schools weren't meeting them, secondary schools, that is. So we still know there's quite a lot of work to be done there as well. So it's really looking at the whole picture. It's looking at homes, it's looking at high streets, it's looking at schools, all of those touch points where children are, and thinking about how we can make the options in those places healthier. I know that's a bit of a long-winded answer, but it's about looking at the whole system, really.
Jim, Act for Food, Act for Change, I think aiming at 2030, what are we trying to do?
So we're actually working on, promoting these actions for change. And there's our colleague Chloe actually shared the link on the chat box for everybody to go into, and you'd see there 17 potential actions that could be highlighted. And we're giving we're wanting to get the feedback of young people and to vote on those actions to see which ones they feel are the priority areas that food systems stakeholders should give importance to, especially member states. And so, you know, what Kath has been talking about in terms of lobbying and shaping the strategy and how, you know, the UK government could address that. That's the kind of similar, I think, approach, if you would, with the actions for change, that with these lists, or at least the selected final list coming from the voting process of the actions for change, would help put out that ask of young people in terms of these are the kinds of actions that we want to see in the food system that we're going to be living in, especially by 2030. And so you'd have a range of actions on resilience, on environment, on food labeling, on young people's participation in policy dialogue, and having that voice in, you know, having a seat at the table and having that voice in decision-making processes. So there's that list that people could go to. And for those who are interested, you could go onto that link that my colleague Chloe shared on the chat box for you to go and vote as well. And we'd really love to see that, you know, what we're hoping to do is that this will be launched in the Food System Summit, and that this would go on to the member states, and really just to say, this is what young people are asking for. And hopefully, you know, it's not just going to be something that will just be presented by September this year, but it would trigger some action between now and 2030, that really there would be structural changes in how we're going to address the issues that these actions would like to target. So yeah, that's basically the Act for Change and campaign in a nutshell, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Jim. Kath, a seat at the table. What a lovely point. You know, a seat at the table, you know, giving children and young adults a seat at the table to get the options that they have in front of them around food, and make their choices and statements. Would you like to say a quick thing on a seat at the table, Kath, before you invite two other people into the panel who we're going to open up? Naomi and Gay are going to carry on with this discussion and keep Jim and Kath here too, but they'll have a chance to talk. But Kath, a seat at the table, nice point, isn't it?
Couldn't have put it better. Yeah, I think it's absolutely vital. And I know that the young people across the world who are actually affected by these issues and can bring such a unique perspective to it, but also who can really speak truth to power and tell it like it is. We had a panel the other day with some of the Bite Back 2030 young people, and they were asking Nestle why they don't have clear labels on many of their products. And they sort of said, but my younger sister, you know, she's got diabetes, and it's really vital that we know how much sugar is in your products. And she said it just in such a sort of common sense way that this head of food or whatever they were at Nestle was just like, yeah, of course, like this needs to happen. So I think, yeah, a seat at the table is absolutely vital.
Fabulous. Kath and Jim, thank you so much. But don't sign off, keep your videos running, because we're going to be joined by Naomi and Gay, because this is going to be another 30 minutes of discussion. But the idea is that we're just going to stretch this a little bit more. We've got Gay from Food for Life and Naomi from Chefs in Schools. So thank you, Kath and Jim, for now. But hi to Gay, hi to Naomi. Gay, give us a quick snapshot of who you are and what you do, and then we'll get Naomi in to do the same, and then we'll open up the discussion further. So hi to Gay.
Hi, it's really great to be here, and thank you so much for inviting Food for Life along, Arthur. It's really good to be here. It's been so interesting as we've been going through the presentations. There's so many things that we're all working on together, and that we're all in the same team, and it's such a great thing to have a platform like this for us to take it to the UN Food Systems Summit, and to be able to have our voice heard collectively. So yeah, it's really fantastic. And there's so many things I just thought, oh my God, yes, we so resonate with so many of the things that our colleagues from around the world have been saying. And obviously, especially Kath, we work together with Bite Back 2030, and we share so many common goals. I've actually got a little presentation about Food for Life. Would you like me to do that, or should we just kind of chat?
If you have got it, but we might have to share it through a different system. I don't know if you.
Oh, don't worry. I'll just tell you then. That's absolutely no problem. So Food for Life started back in well, Jeanette Orry started Food for Life in the sort of the turn of the millennium, when she was a chef in a school and really was just appalled by what was being served. So she just turned it round in her own school, and she really became an advocate for what you could do with the whole school approach. So she looked at what was happening with food. She got more sustainable food in. She got more local food in. She also started encouraging teachers to use food in class and to use food to demonstrate what they were learning in the curriculum. And so this grew into what is now Food for Life, and we have these amazing people who work with us, and we have programs all over the country. So there's currently, we've had over 6,000 schools go through Food for Life awards. So when you think about the number of children who've been impacted with that, it's such an amazing program to be part of. It really is. So the way that we work is that we cover school food. That is at the heart of what we do. So we look at the food quality. All we ask in our kind of the first step in the Bronze Award is that schools fulfil their obligation to the school food standards, because as we've touched on, they are there, whatever we think of them, however much more fresh food we'd like to see in there and however much less fried food we'd like to see included, there isn't anyone actually overseeing it. And so what Food for Life does when we work with schools is we ask them to take responsibility for the food that they're serving and make sure that it's hitting those standards, but also that it's hitting welfare standards. This isn't really touched on in the school food standards. We want to make sure if the schools are using fish, that it's sustainable fish, that it's MSC certified, that where they're using eggs, they use free range eggs. I mean, I don't think a child would be very happy if they saw the sort of eggs that, you know, many catering companies or schools think is okay. And, you know, we want to make sure that the food that's served is the sort of food that should be served to children, that is respectful of the planet, but also of the people it's being served to. We also use, if schools are using meat, that they use sustainably sourced meat. The red tractor is the minimum standard that we ask for. So that's at bronze, and at silver, at gold, we increase that as well. We also ask that 75% of these of the food is freshly prepared. So you know that it is the sort of food that you would expect. And so it's kind of by asking for these things, we're reducing the reliance on ultra processed foods. But the award covers more than just the food quality. We also ask schools to look at their food leadership and their food culture. And so we also ask schools to get involved with families as well. And so the work that we do in school and is very child-led. We have we ask schools to set up what we call our SNAG, which is our School Nutrition Action Group, which is like a school council. So you've got kids from all through the school process and senior leadership and people from the kitchen team working together. So it's a ground up approach so that children really own the project. You know, so it's not like the head teacher comes in and goes, right, and now we're all going to do healthy food, guys. And the kids go, so it's actually coming from the children, involving all the teachers. We ask the teachers to include food education in their normal lessons. So it's not about making more work. It's about doing things that you have to do for the curriculum, but pulling in about food and growing, bringing things to life. If you're talking about the Romans, let's talk about spelt. Let's talk about the grains that the Romans brought from everywhere. You know, if you're talking about, if you're talking about RE, you can make bread in your RE class. You know, you can talk about, in art, you can use these things. So it's about bringing it across the curriculum, taking children into schools, from schools into farms. And so that children understand about where food comes from. And we really think that, it's fine. You have to have good food in school. I mean, please, can we do that? But also about giving children that 360 approach so that they know where it comes from, why it matters. And if they're engaged and if they're educated about food and they're making the choices themselves and then they're taking it home and advocating to their families, that's what we think is actually going to change things.
Wow, that's a huge introduction, Gay.
Sorry, I hope I haven't gone too far.
Well, at least we get an understanding of what's going on, right?
Well, we do a lot of stuff.
Yes, in schools, Naomi, seriously important and something that's been happening now for a good few years. And you've been working with one of our other guests today. But Naomi, tell us a little bit about yourself and what Chefs in Schools does and what you do.
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm very honoured to be amongst the people on this call today, because I've been just fascinated as I've been listening to everybody else talking. So Chefs in Schools was founded 3 years ago, and it was co-founded by Henry Dimbleby, who's currently obviously writing the National Food Strategy for Government. And I was struck as I was listening to everybody else talking, how much this kind of debate around food in schools is just a microcosm of wider systemic issues facing our food system. I think things like challenges of malnutrition and diet-related disease, the lack of investment, the need for traceability, and the disconnect between agriculture, nutrition, and school food, all of these things, and these are not just national problems, these are also global problems. So it's been really interesting. So a quick introduction to our charity. We, as I said, we were founded 3 years ago by a chef, a head teacher, and a school food campaigner, being Henry. And our co-founder, Nicole Pisani, was our first school chef. And she kind of came to take on the challenge of school food and realized very quickly, she came from a fantastic restaurant background. She realized very quickly you can't just change food in schools and put brilliant food on that's kind of locally sourced and wonderful and expect the kids to recognize that food straight away and be really excited about it. So she changed all of the food in school to this wonderful kind of quality food, and the kids were crying at the doorway and asking when the old chef was coming back, because what she learned really quickly was you have to teach kids about food as well. So I think connecting into what Gay was just saying, and also one of the questions I've seen in the comments, the kind of the wider role, and particularly in school food, of what we can teach kids about food in schools and the impacts that can have in the moment. So our model is based around having a head chef and food educator in every school, and that person takes on both provision of the food and teaching the kids about food. And that's all about kind of sharing that passion for food and sharing that expertise with the next generation. We work directly with some schools, so our aim is to set up 100 perfect examples over the next 5 years, and then using that experience to develop materials and resources to help every single school in the country achieve better school food. So one of our goals from that is that by 2030 we want to have a professionally trained chef running the kitchen in every school in the country. Now, I don't think that should be such a great step. I think it's such an important job and we massively undervalue it as a society. So partly we just need to recognise that incredible workforce. So that's what we do.
Thank you, Naomi. So Naomi and Gabe, we were covering some points yesterday in the sort of lead up to this, and there are a number of points that are quite poignant. But it does seem to be that both from Kath and Jim as well, is that getting children interested in food and giving them a seat at the table is vital. Should we talk a little bit about getting children interested in food and giving them this seat?
Absolutely. I mean, it is, I think we all realise that having things done to us is a completely counterproductive thing. You have to be, if you're enabled to do things, and if things are done in a kind of co-design perspective where it is the people who are actually the changes happening, who need the change to happen, are part of the process of creating that, which is very much, I feel, where Bite Back is smashing it. These are the things that we have to get children's voice to be. They need to, if we sort of need to help to nurture them to understand why the thing matters and why food choices matter, and to use what they're passionate about to help shape the way that they ask for change. And if they're talking about it at home, and if their parents are starting to think about it, and if the senior leadership in schools are starting to think about it, it's a really important way to work. And I mean, the way that we work with the snag groups in schools is one, they do a questionnaire, and they look at the sort of foods that they like, also the sort of foods that they're used to at home. Because a lot of the times, a lot of the schools we work in are in very multicultural areas. And so what there might be on the menu from a sort of centralised caterer may not be representative of food that is culturally appropriate. So we actually, we get children doing these questionnaires. It's a really fantastic exercise for them to do academically, we support this with resources. We don't just send schools off and go, right, off you go, do a questionnaire. So then they can come back, and then the children work directly with the catering team and with the caterers themselves to look at the sort of food that's on the menu, so that there's a sort of a two-way conversation. They're learning about nutrition, that they're also learning about how important their voice is, and getting that, you know, that sense of ownership over what they're doing. And I think giving people more power to make changes for themselves is going to make people want to make better choices. And, you know, I mean, obviously we've got so many competing, you know, influences, as Kath was saying earlier on, you know, that triangle of cheap food, accessible food, and attractive food. There's also highly addictive food, and actually making sure that children are aware of where they're being played. You know, I think this is there's so many strands to it, but I think absolutely putting children front and center of whatever projects you're working with, you know, I mean, that's something we clearly will do. And actually, as you know, as Naomi was saying, you know, you can go in there and you can change the food, and then the children are going to be heartbroken because they wanted the stuff that there was, you know, that's obviously got the mouthfeel that's not particularly good for you, but it's delicious. I mean, we all love junk food sometimes.
Change is difficult, isn't it? When you're used to one thing and then you change to another thing.
Exactly. But this is why you have to take children with you and give them the education so that they are the ones demanding change.
Naomi, getting children interested in food and schools getting excited about real food. I mean, this is obviously the direction that you're going in, right?
100% our kind of big goal. We don't push a healthy eating agenda necessarily. We push a philosophy of, you know, eating real unprocessed food is naturally good for us, but it's also a pleasant and pleasurable experience that we kind of want to share. And I guess where I look at this at the kind of top level, and I think I don't see any end to the benefits of educating kids about food in school. So I'm part of the lost generation that went through school, and I ate, no word of a lie, I ate chips and chocolate bars every single day that I was in school. When I learnt about food, I learnt how to design the packaging for an in-flight lasagna in my GCSE levels. Now, in the 30 plus years since I ate my first school meal, school food has come a huge way, but there's still too much emphasis on kind of packet mixes and beige food coming out of school kitchens, and really not enough emphasis on food education. And I think as a society, so if you look at the kind of Western society as a whole, although I recognise it as Donald was pointing out earlier, goes far further than that, and there's a obesity crisis across the globe. But if we think about the kind of intervention points, the McKinsey Institute did a really interesting report a few years ago about the kind of Western obesity crisis, and they identified 18 areas for governments to look at in terms of helping to tackle that. And 6 of those were in schools. 6 of those were kind of early intervention opportunities. Again, Donald was talking about the first 7,000 days of life. We have huge opportunities in schools to intervene directly in kids' diets, but also to change their eating habits for the rest of their life. And that's where, you know, putting kids at the front and center of that, absolutely, and getting their feedback, but also teaching them about new food. We don't come out of the womb craving sugar or craving vegetables. We have to learn those habits as we go on through life. And I just think there's a crucial opportunity that we need to have the foresight to invest in.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, because I want to ask a question. Why is it up to schools to provide nutritious meals? Shouldn't we be providing nutritious meals at home, and then school just provides a little boost? Or is it the absolute responsibility of school to build nutrition into its curriculum and educate children? I mean, you know, because obviously it's a big responsibility for school to teach it, but why is it not being given the importance? And should schools have to do it? I'm asking, let me just say, I'm going to open it up to all 4 of you. Let's start with Kath. Why should we be doing it in schools?
Why should we be implementing these measures, you mean?
Yeah, I just play devil's advocate. I mean, obviously I know, but I just want to know, you know, is it up to schools to do this? I mean, it's obviously one of the, you say 190 days in the year children are going to school and eating a school meal. So, you know, why is it so important?
Well, I mean, I think the naysayers would have to sort of stop and think when you think that, you know, 190 days of the year children are eating a meal in a school. And I think, you know, the government is providing that meal. So isn't it our duty to do the best possible thing that we can to make sure that that food is as nutritious and as good for their brains and their bodies, so that they can concentrate, so that they can perform better academically. And I remember after the first sort of Jamie School Dinners campaign came out, there was some really robust academic evaluation that found that the improvement in the school meals had translated into improved academic performance. There's also the argument that, you know, at the moment, unfortunately, ill health, diet-related disease is costing us a lot. And I know that this argument is one that perhaps resonates more with politicians, but I think the NHS currently spends, I think it's £7.1 billion a year on diet-related disease. And I think in terms of lost productivity, the figure is £27 billion a year. So actually, if we make sure that young people are having access to decent, nutritious food, then the ripple effects of that throughout society, not only for their immediate health, for their concentration and for their academic ability, but also for their lifelong health, are going to be seen. And the benefits of that, from the point of view of what we balancing the books from a sort of from a government point of view, are also really important to note. So I mean,
this is a good why. This is a very good why. Naomi, why should we be doing this? You know, I've got a really good one from Kath. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, at the end of the day, unfortunately, because it is a conversation around, you know, it's a conversation around health, it's also a conversation around economics. And I think Kath makes a really good point there. And I guess I would go back to Donald's point earlier, talking about, you know, every country in the world offers free education for kids. Now, of course, that's a nice thing to do for kids, making sure that they're educated. However, there's a really good reason why countries do that. And that's because it's an investment in wider society, and it's investment in the economic potential of that country. So there's a reason why we educate kids. And in the same way, we need to be making a really compelling argument for the need to invest in kids' health. This is one way that we can invest in kids' health. It's not the only way. But I mean, not only is it morally the right thing to do, not only are we spending $4 billion-ish a year procuring food in the public sector, that's taxpayer money paying for it. So why should we not demand the best? But also, it does have that kind of wider economic and societal benefit.
Jim, just a quick why.
Well, I think I'd be coming off from a different point of view, coming from a developing country perspective, given that, you know, schools necessarily are not obliged to give meals to students, but there is a feeding program that does happen from time to time, if I'm not mistaken. And so I think it's that is one important opportunity for you know, stakeholders to come in and provide healthy food through those feeding programs. And I think the project I mentioned that the university I used to be connected with was, you know, an example of why a school and home garden creates that balance somehow, that it creates a consistency in the kind of environment that the kids would be exposed to. You know, if they're exposed to the right kind of food that is grown at home, which they consume, and they go to a school that you know, grows the same kind of food that is being served to them, which is also healthy, you know, that somehow always builds a type of psyche in the child, that there is consistency in these two worlds that I get exposed to. You know, we're saying 190 days the kid is in school, but if you make up for the rest of that 365 days in the house and you balance it off, then, you know, the kid doesn't have to be looking at, you know, I want this, you know, environment because this is the kind of food that this is the kind of food that I'm exposed to. This one, not too much. But if there's that consistency, you know, the young person is given the option, or at least grows in an environment where, you know, they're educated to know what kind of food is healthy for them to consume. So I think it's very crucial to create that necessary and enabling environment for that.
Right, isn't it? Yeah, really good idea. Gay, you know, why are we doing what we're doing? I mean, do we have to well at school? Come on.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely everything everybody said, I couldn't agree more with, especially, what Jim was just saying then about consistency. But I think from my point of view, when I'm speaking to schools, it's so much, it's in your interest, head teacher, it's in your interest, because we know from Food for Life research that where we're involved with schools, they're twice as likely to be Ofsted outstanding. Now, there's lots of reasons for that. It's partly, what Naomi and Kath are saying about, actually, if you have eaten a proper meal and it isn't just a sugar bomb, you're actually going to be able to concentrate in the afternoon, and you're going to be able to study, and you're going to be able to learn. It's also about brain development. And for me, I think something that's really important is it's about leveling up as well. You're giving everybody the same opportunity to develop the cognitive skills regardless of where they come from, and to just leave it that some people are going to do really well because their families are interested in healthy food, and then some families who aren't, for whatever reason, are going to just fall back. And that's something that we've really seen through the pandemic, is actually there really is an agenda here. We really do have to make sure that there's equity within the system for people to have good food. And I think that's something that I'm really noticing schools are actually more interested in now, is that school is supposed to be a place of fairness, and that has to be throughout the whole day. It can't just be looking at certain lessons and in certain situations. You apply, you talk about these things through PHSE or whatever, you have to apply them, otherwise children are going to pick up on that inconsistency. And you have to give these equality issues, and to me it's very much an equality issue that children have access to real food. It's got to be consistent through the whole day.
Go quickly, Naomi, a little bit about structural change within the food systems around us. We require structural change, don't we, within the school systems to give a better nutritional meal. Can we just jump on a little bit around structural change, and perhaps in the game we can finish off with school food standards, but structural change, Naomi?
Yeah, so I think, and I'll go back to what I said earlier. I do think there's been huge progress in school food in the last 30 years, and genuinely that's pretty much all down to people like Jeanette Ory and Jamie Oliver, starting the battle to bring food standards back into school. But there are still huge issues with the way we procure food in schools. We spend enormous billions of pounds a year procuring food in the public sector, and yet we have very weak buying standards. So government buying standards, for example, Gay mentions, we don't talk about procurement when we sustainability, and we don't talk about kind of ingredient procurement when we talk about school food, and that's because government buying standards don't apply to school food. When we do procure contracts in schools, they're quite often these enormous contracts that sweep up hundreds of schools into them. So I'll take an example of a South London council who recently awarded a £20 million contract. That contract only had one bidder for it. That bidder was the incumbent, had not been doing a very good job, but there was no one else bidding for the contract, and so therefore that contract was re-awarded. And the way that procurement was run was based 50% on the financial element and 50% on quality, which is a measure which encompasses a myriad of different things, to the point where only 18% of the award criteria, and I'm getting very kind of percentage based, but only 18% was actually around the food. So in reality, the vast majority is weighted towards cost. And until we start prioritizing food differently, and until we start saying actually the quality of food and the quality of the way that food is served and the health and the nutrition needs to be the priority, because it's money that we're spending as a society that the taxpayers are funding, so therefore it needs to meet the aims of a wider society. So I think those are kind of issues that relate very specifically to school food in the public sector. But then there's far wider issues. We're importing huge amounts of food. The school fruit and veg scheme, for example, imports a vast amount of fruit and veg, which doesn't, sometimes is wonderful quality. It's not a case that all imported food is bad, but we've got the balance, I think, entirely wrong. So there are these kind of issues around the big structural challenges around procurement are the ones that I would really, really like to see key action on, because until we do that, and until we break the monopoly of various kind of really, really big caterers, we get more smaller suppliers coming through, more schools feeling empowered to run things for themselves and really put food back at the heart of the school, then we won't see that kind of dynamic and exciting and innovative outsourcing food in all cases should be about bringing in expertise and innovation and excitement. And for too long now, it's been about managing financial risk and managing health and safety risk. And that is not the essence of good food, in my opinion.
Thank you, Naomi. Just quickly, Professor Donald Bundy, you've raised your hand. Thank you for raising your hand. Would you like to say something?
Yeah, I hope I'm not interrupting, but I just so enjoyed this, and you asked this great question about why do school feeding, and you got super answers. I agree with them all. But I just wanted to throw in two other reasons why countries do this. Do you know that school feeding is the largest safety net in the world, the most extensive safety net, the most extensive social protection program in the world? And let me give you an example. In 2008, when the food prices spiked, and we went into global recession around that, there was an offering of aid programs to support that, and people thought that countries would ask to use the aid money to reduce the price of food, to subsidize food. But no, very large numbers of countries came forward to expand their school feeding programs, because for many countries, I'm now talking about poorer countries, for many countries, the only social safety net, the only benefit program they have is actually that. Here's a program that reaches right into the community and feeds children directly. So for many countries, this was the main purpose. Frankly, in the UK, that's actually why we set up school feeding programs in 1904 in the UK. It was for the specific purpose of feeding poor children in fact in urban communities. That was the purpose of it. It was a social safety net. It wasn't about better education or better nutrition. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention was the other reason that countries feed children is because of the benefits to the agricultural sector. The US set up its school feeding programs in the 1940s specifically as an agricultural program. It was to use food surpluses in the States to feed the children in America. And a lot of countries now see that as a really sensible thing to do. We reckon that about 2,000 jobs are created for every 100,000 children fed. It makes very good economic sense. So I just wanted to throw those in. There are lots of, as it were, external reasons why school feeding is also a good thing, just apart from the benefits for the kids themselves.
Thank you, Donald. Brilliant stuff. Gay, I'll just come to you 1 second. I've had some feedback from Ben Arthur, who was one of the first trainees from Jamie Oliver's 15 program. I worked with Ben in the kitchen. Hi, Ben. Thank you so much for taking part. He's made an interesting point here. First of all, he says this is amazing stuff. Thank you all so much. He says that he feels that we need to change our attitude before we can impose or employ a real change for children and young people for the better. We're highly influenced by the media, newspapers, television, increasingly internet and social media. Big business and huge corporations' greed seems to have a stronghold on these mediums, which seem to make it very difficult to get anything done that isn't based on financial gain, which leans into what you're saying, Naomi. So thank you, Ben, for that point. Gay, perhaps you just would like to jump on that a tiny bit about structural change, but also the school food standards in the UK, make a change there. We're going to need to finish this panel, but Gay, I'll just give you this last point here. Structural change and food standards.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting what Professor Bundy was just saying there, because one of the things that we have because of the catering situation, we have an award program that's for caterers as well, and so that caterers are inspected. I mean, we physically go in and check what their procurement is. So these are, when schools are choosing their contracts for schools. And one of the things that we looked at is that for every £1 that's spent on a served here menu, £3 goes back into the local community as social return on investment. So, what we're talking about here, the way that the procurement is actually done and using local food has such an amazing effect on the local community. And that, this applies all over the world. So, it's so important that we include that in the school food standards, just because it's got such a wide-ranging impact. It's not just about health; it's about sustainability. It's about the sustainable, the food, the sustainable development goals as well. How schools can actually influence those themselves. But the school food standards, I think one of the issues with it is that, as we talked about, they're not, no one's enforcing them. They're so voluntary. And I think one of the real issues is that a caterer can be following the letter of the school food standards, but not the spirit. And until we start enforcing, like Ben was saying, until we start actually changing our attitudes about what's important and looking at whether or not it is just a bottom line on costs, as Naomi was saying, if we're only driven by cost and we're not looking at the spirit of what we're doing here, until someone actually starts enforcing these school food standards, we are going to be stuck in this spiral where it is all about the bottom line.
Okay, thank you, Gay. Woo! Well, that's a quick 60 minutes. Kath, Jim, Gay, Naomi, we've had questions coming in, and Kim Smith, thank you so much for your questions. There's a broad discussion about nutrition, health education. What about a broader, more comprehensive food education that teaches children about all of the elements of the food system? Yes, Kim. And then Kim's asking, do panelists think that food education has a wider role in society in teaching populations about their role in improving food systems? Kim, I think you needed to be on the panel here. So many questions you're putting in here. Can a broad food education help populations leverage their capacity to help change the food system? Kim, we might try and answer your questions a little bit more at the end, because there's lots of things that we need to go through. I'm going to thank Gay, Naomi, Jim, and Kath, because right now we're going to go back to school. We're going to run a little video and then speak to William, who's the head teacher of the school, a little bit about what it is to run a school and have food systems running inside your school. So thank you to the panel, really appreciate it. Don't sign off, because we'll be able to come back to you with questions and Q&As. If we run the video now, please, let's go back to school. Wow, what a fabulous opportunity to see the goings on behind the scene of a very progressive school. Really connecting children to the gardens, the allotment, the chefs, the teachers, and the fact that the kids are getting to cook every day, or certainly the way through their curriculum. It definitely gets tears in my eyes, because I would love to have gone to school like this. William, now I'm always a little bit reluctant to just use a first name basis to a head teacher, because I think I've still been conditioned in school to say sir. I wonder, could we get William's video running and the sound on, because I'd love to stretch the conversation out now about the successes and perhaps the difficulties that you faced in the school there at Highgate Primary School. Hi to William Dean, the headmaster of the school you've just seen. The video is a little bit choppy. Hopefully you picked up everything, but it's such a lovely video. And it could have given us a good insight into what you do. Mr. Dean, I'll call you just because
call me William. Yeah, we're very much first name terms.
We're on first name terms, William. Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining us and for letting us have a sort of quick insight into what you do at the school. I'd love to open up the discussion. We've had lots of talks now about the importance of school meals and nutrition and children getting to the table and having their points sort of heard. Maybe introduce yourself first a little bit now and your opinions on how to run a school and the food there, but also a little bit of, I guess, a reply to what's been said so far. But hi to William.
Okay, well, at Highgate Primary School, as I said at the start of the film, we have been on a bit of a journey with food. And it's a difficult thing to get right, because running a school is hard enough. Throw in a 500 cover restaurant on top of that, and it's demanding. But what we are learning is that the benefits of doing that and getting it right are huge, and go well beyond children's understanding and enjoyment of food. So I think we started. Really, when it was forced upon us, we had our food was provided by the local authority contract. That was coming to an end, and we had to make a decision on, what we did. We did had conversations with various contractors to see about external provision, and what we found was that the quality wasn't what we wanted. So we did start to explore how we could do that in-house. And I think what was quite interesting, which Naomi shared, it's so much more than getting the right chef in. So we started off with a very good chef, served up what I thought was really high quality appealing food, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the children are going to straight away enjoy it and say thank you very much. It's a much bigger journey than that, and what we've found over time is the importance of getting children involved with food at every stage. So they have to understand about food, they have to understand what they're eating. Food has to be completely integrated through the curriculum. We get the children growing, again, as part of the curriculum. It's very much a topic-based curriculum. So we then took on the allotment, developed a program of making sure that all children have the opportunity to go over there to plant things, to nurture, to harvest, to see what we could grow there that we could get into the school meals. And we soon found that we're not going to be able to produce nearly enough food to feed the school, but certainly things like the salad vegetables, things like the herbs, just make a difference and complete that story of linking the allotment with what the children are eating at school. Then the other side of it, which I think is absolutely essential, is getting the children cooking. And I've said it to you before, but at school there's so many different aspects of learning. Some children love some, don't love others, but universally every child enjoys getting involved in cooking. So we were doing that. It's quite difficult in the classrooms with the Bellings, and so we had quite a big fundraising campaign to build the cookery school. And 2 years ago that was opened, and since then it really has taken the food to a new level. So every half term there will be a food focus within the curriculum. All children will work in the studio or cookery school in small groups. There's 8 stations, so half a class at a time. And the importance there is that they're working together, they're learning new skills, but they're getting really excited about the cooking, and then at the end of that they'll sit down and they'll eat together. So where we are now is that all the areas are now integrated. We have, as I said in the film, fantastic chefs. We recruited for a head chef, but ended up recruiting 2, which means we have much more capacity for head chef to be working, supporting children to learn how to cook. So they'll be used the studio for curriculum time. They'll also be running the cookery school for extracurricular activities. So after school, potentially moving into the holidays, weekends, and opening that up to families. So it's been quite a journey, but we're certainly getting there. We've certainly got a way to go because it looked fairly idyllic, I think, in the film, but there were certainly bits that we didn't show where that there's progress to be made. But that's our journey. And I'll tell you what really resonated from listening to the panelists and the discussion so far is how this, I suppose, echoes going back a few years around the tobacco industry and how things changed, particularly when you look at the triangle of price, appeal, convenience, and all the legislation that was put in place to make sure that cigarettes were expensive, that it wasn't convenient, that you weren't able to smoke in the workplace, etc. And the appeal was taken away as advertising was no longer allowed. And I think where we are with food at the moment is we can talk about those 3, but so long as it is very much allowed and it's very convenient, and it's very convenient to have low quality food, the change isn't going to happen. So that there will be people like yourself and people who are tuned in today who are making those decisions, but to have really significant change needs greater support centrally.
William, it sounds like though that although you probably had a passion for this and you realised it was probably healthy for the children and it needed to be inclusion of nutrition into children's meals because they probably learn better. But in some aspects, you've really challenged the system because you've had to raise funds externally, you've had to get chefs in, and you have to get the children connected, and this is not particularly normal. I mean, how much of a challenge do you think this is to the system, and how quickly do you think other schools would be able to take this level of food inclusion into curriculum on?
That's a good question. And our starting point was around the big consultation we did with the school community on what sort of school we wanted to be and what was important, and coming through loud and clear is that food's very important, that sustainability is important, that these are things we really need to be focusing on. The problem I see is that head teachers, governing bodies are under pressure to deliver standards, and the way that we're held to account is ultimately through the Ofsted framework, and the stakes are pretty high with Ofsted. They're very high in that if you're not delivering standards, if you're not delivering progress, if your underachieving groups aren't being challenged to be successful reading, writing and maths, then ultimately you can be closed down, taken over by an academy. We really have fought to keep our independence, and to do that your standards have to be good enough. But the standards aren't really so important if your health isn't great, and as a nation, if we are seeing what we're seeing with regard to children's health, that seems to be every bit as important as the relatively narrow criteria that the inspection service are focusing on. I believe the Ofsted framework, it talks about developing pupils' understanding of how to eat healthily, but there doesn't really seem to be anything about the quality of the meals that are provided. And I think that would be something to be looked at.
Yeah.
At our most recent inspection, inspectors weren't interested at all in having a look at what we were doing in the wider curriculum. They weren't interested in food, they weren't interested in what was going on in the dining centre. And I think it's so short-sighted, because it has to be connected. It has to be a holistic view of child development, and as we know, everything is connected. So I do feel that this agenda has come with a conviction that it's right, but it isn't going to tick boxes when it comes to the Ofsted framework.
Yeah, it would seem a shame that for such supposedly advanced nations like the US and the UK, Australia, or any sort of developed world country, still hasn't got the capacity to understand that food is connected to education, nutrition, and healthy children obviously learn better. Can I just ask, is that something that you've seen over your experiences as a teacher and then becoming a head teacher, is that nutrition and food is connected to the way children learn?
Absolutely connected, connected in every way. And what's been quite interesting with the arrangements that we've had to put in place around COVID is that the lunch has to be over a long period of time. So we're finding that our children in the older year groups aren't eating until later. They get hungry in the morning. You really notice the impact that has on their concentration. Likewise, the younger children are eating earlier in the afternoon. They flag. One of the things our chefs do, which is fantastic, is they cook prepared bread every day, and it's the highlight of the afternoon when the bread comes round to the reception classrooms, and it's like bread time. And the teachers do report that they eat it, they love it, they talk about it, and their energy levels go up. So without connected, another initiative we had was that we were finding there were children coming into school hungry and found it very difficult to settle. So we've just provided, didn't make a big deal of it, but we put bananas in the year 6 classrooms. The older children and children would just help themselves. You notice the impact that it has. Yeah, it is all connected, and certainly good food supports good concentration and focus.
Now, William, I have a question, and Kim Smith, I'm so sorry we didn't invite you to be a panelist because there's so much that you're saying on the Q&As and in the chat box, which is fabulous. But I'm going to ask a question, William, from Kim Smith. Kim is asking, does William think that the model that he's built at Highgate Primary School is a model that other schools could follow? And what could other schools or policymakers learn from your experience?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say it was necessarily our model. I think we've been greatly helped by Shepton School, been working with Naomi. I think we established since 2014. But it is very much a model that anyone can adopt. It's not complicated. It's a very straightforward model that there are three parts to it. You over time develop a food culture by serving good food, by involving children in its preparation, and teaching children how to cook. I think teachers will talk a lot about it being a crowded curriculum, but this is the curriculum. You incorporate it into the curriculum. Whatever topic you're doing will have an aspect of food. There's really fantastic opportunities for communication, speaking and listening, reading, writing around food. Lots of art activities can come from food. So it just is just needs to be integrated within the curriculum and part of how the school runs. And it is an investment and a commitment, but it is certainly very possible for all schools to take this path.
Mm. Well, I'm certainly inspired, and it's fabulous. I would certainly love to have gone to. I mean, I went to a primary school in London, and it was really in the city. I mean, that was when we had free milk delivered by Margaret Thatcher. Well, delivered before Margaret Thatcher, and then with these lovely little milk bottles with the little metal tops.
Yeah.
Freezing cold in the winter and boiling hot in the summer, but it was always free milk. But I mean, I remember that it was a big deal with the teachers. They were up in arms because the last year of my primary school year, they took the free milk away, and the teachers were very upset. And I was just thinking, well, I didn't really like it in the summer, but it's interesting how, little subtleties like that were pulled away from inner city schools and probably free milk across the country. Do you remember that and the reasons behind it?
Well, one of my claims to fame was that I remember in year 6, I was a milk monitor, which meant I went around with the trolley delivering milk.
That's right. That's right. The milk monitor.
Loved that. Interestingly, milk is very much back in, and we have milk with our younger children. We serve milk at lunchtime, so it's a choice of water, milk, or both. So yes, I do remember that things changed quite significantly in the, I suppose, late 70s, 1980s. But I think the issue is that it comes down at the moment in education to individuals with conviction to do the right thing by our children when it comes to nutrition, but we need more support. One of the things I'll share is the impact of universal free school meals. So every child having a school meal up to the age of 7. And what we're finding there is that you take away the choice, children come in, they have their food, they eat it all together. Because the menu is repeating on a 2-weekly cycle, they become very familiar with the choices, and they love it. Once it gets to year 3, and it's no longer universal free school meals and their choice of packed lunch, it becomes more complicated. We have children bringing in packed lunch, eating it alongside children having free school meals, and who are paying for their school meals, and you get the side-by-side comparison, and it's not a level playing field. So something that came from chefs in school, which is so simple, is you take away the packaging. So children now with bring the packed lunch have to take it out of the packaging and put it on a plate. Mm. And once you take away the packaging, it doesn't look quite so attractive to the children. It would be so much better if we were able to do preschool meals right the way through primary to age 11, because by age 11, those habits are formed. and they're the ones they'll take into secondary school and beyond. So that would be what I would be proposing. When it comes to the triangle, price is no longer an option. It's certainly more convenient for parents to have the school provider meal than have to prepare one. And if children aren't eating right their way through, the appeal is there. So that would be my wish.
Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you so very much. Love to get as many points in as possible, questions in as possible, but we're going to need to keep moving on because we are supposed to be finishing at 1 o'clock. So William, thank you so much for the insight and for your time. I appreciate you.
You're welcome. Nice to talk to you after.
Thank you. And I was going to bring Naomi in to give you a little bit of a reunion.
Yeah, big up, Naomi.
Yeah, big up, Naomi. And Naomi, thank you for your help with doing William's work at Highgate Primary School. We're going to move on because we have to, because we've got some fabulous panelists now to come in. So thank you to William. And right, let's get this moving on now, because we are moving across from teachers, from policymakers, from advocates. Now we're moving on to mums, super mums. We've got a nutritionist, we've got a chef, and we've got almost a global view from Karen. So if we could unlock the cameras of Karen and of Debbie and of course Patricia. As you can see how quickly the time goes, and we've got so much to talk about, but you know, we've spoken about so much already, but you know, we talked a lot yesterday about the importance of understanding as a mum how to feed your children, maybe learning on the job, all these kinds of things. But a quick introduction from each of you, and I must ask you to be quick, otherwise we will lose time on the discussion. But perhaps Debbie, you could lead off with saying hello. I can see your mic'd up already. A quick hello, a quick description of who you are and what you do, and then we'll move on to Patsy and then to Karen. So hi to Debbie.
Hi. So a very quick description of what I do, as you say. I'm a final year student with the College of Naturopathic Medicine, studying biomedicine and specialising in nutrition. I'm a mum of 2 young children, both of whom have medical conditions and food allergies, which is what started me down this path. And I could probably talk about that for hours. I will stop there so that we can get on with the discussion, and I'll move over to Karen or Patricia.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you. Hi, Patricia.
Hello. I'm a holistic chef. It means I have an approach to food. It's based on a very systemic vision, and I work with food and climate I work as a food and climate educator for children and adults and educational programs, and as a private chef as well, helping clients facing already chronic disease. And the tools I explore the most are authentic living, biodiversity, food waste, and natural cooking techniques. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation, and congratulations for everyone's work here. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Karen?
Hi everyone, I'm Karen Allen. I am living currently in Melbourne, Australia. I'm a Melbourne girl born and bred. I'm a community and international development consultant, currently working across food systems, particularly on the United Nations Food System Summit, COP26, and Nutrition for Growth this year particularly. I also have 4 teenage children who are aged 13, 15, 17, and 19 and constantly consume food.
It's a full fridge or an empty fridge, depending on.
Depends on the day, I think.
Yeah, I forgot to say I have 1 child.
Yeah.
I'm a mom too. I'm a mom and part of the Chef's Manifesto team.
Super mum. There was a point made yesterday that when I said, "Oh, hi, super mums," actually, I'm not saying there's just you 3 are super mums. Every mother is super. You know, it's a tough job there bringing up kids, right? So, but you're not alone. You have dads too. Anyway, look, let's open this discussion up, because the idea is that we want to talk a little bit about perhaps super tips, ways around we can be changing the way food habits are for our children, looking to get children to eat healthy and to make school lunches better. But Debbie, there's been some experience, and I'll start with you, Debbie, and we'll open up the discussion. There's been some experiences that you had with one of your children around the health and how you approach food for them, and perhaps you were told things by the medical profession, say this is why you should do it, and you just knew instinctively that it wasn't right. Can we open up that as a discussion?
Absolutely. So yeah, as you said, I think I come at this from a slightly different angle, in that what set me down this journey was Both of my children, for a start, are dairy allergic. My oldest boy is 8. He's actually anaphylactic, and we sort of discovered this when he was about 5 weeks old. And I think you're told, as you're expecting, and you go to all these classes, that you must give your children calcium, and they must do that, and you're terrified that if you don't do what they're saying, their bone's going to be weak and all that kind of thing. So when you're told your child has a food allergy and a big portion of their diet is now off the table, what do you do? So I went to my GP and said, well, okay, we'll deal with this. What do I feed him? And he said, he's a wonderful GP, by the way. He said, well, I don't know. This isn't part of my training. And I think that was kind of when it first hit me that actually, GPs only get, I think it's like 7 hours of nutrition training. And he said, I will refer you to a dietitian. Unfortunately, the dietitian's referral was 15 months in the making. It's long on wait list. There are so many children who have these kinds of conditions. So I was left kind of to fend for myself and panicking. I have a young child, a newborn baby that's got all these allergies, and I need to make sure that he's going to grow properly, so I will do my own digging. And so that's kind of where I came from. But going to the health centres and having him weighed, of course, he's underweight. He can't keep food down. There are other things that were wrong with him. He was developing asthma. And they were saying, almost kind of, you're neglecting your child. You just need to get weight on him. Just give him anything, whatever he enjoys eating, if it's, cake or whatever. You need to just get weight and calories on his child. And part of me was thinking, I don't know if I'm brave enough to go against him, but this doesn't sound right to me. I'm not sure I want to be forming his habits in this way. This is not what I had in mind. So I went and did my own research. Long story short, the changes I made to his diet, he was in hospital every couple of weeks, every winter, being pumped full of steroids, having an asthma attack, not being able to breathe, on a nebulizer, and being called an ambulance. I know all the paramedics' names around here, they're great friends now. But I changed his diet, and I'm not saying this works for all children, but he hasn't been in hospital since I changed his diet years ago. And then I started looking at nutrition. And I think my point is, if the GPs don't offer this kind of advice, I would like to see a nutritionist attached to a GP surgery and not have to wait for a dietitian. I would like that also to be made available to parents regardless of what their child has. We were offered a dietitian because he had allergies. What about the parents whose children don't have allergies but want to raise them eating well, developing good habits? We've got a barrage of marketing coming at parents. We've got time poor parents. Convenience food is going up, and you can kind of see the correlation. I'm a child of the 80s myself, so I was raised on processed food. And often, genes run in families, and that can cause problems, but diets also run in families. And I think that's what we need to be looking at. My parents fed me this way, I'm going to feed my child this way, unless you're told differently. And we know that processed food and convenience food is getting, it's more and more of a trend. I don't think that unless we have the resources in place for parents to access parents and carers, that we're going to be able to turn this on its head. Children are being educated beautifully in school. My children, for example, go to a school where they've also got a garden and they're taught about food, and it's wonderful, and they come home and tell me about it. But I do know that there are also parents at the school whose opinions I get, where their children come home and go, we should be eating this or we should be doing that. And the parents say, oh, great, are they going to come and cook it for me as well? Because they get defensive. Food is a very sensitive and emotive subject, and they don't know what to do, and they're time poor, they want convenience. They don't necessarily know how to incorporate it, or perhaps they don't have the finances and they're saying, no, healthy food is expensive and I can't access it and I don't know what to do. And it just actually, it kind of leverages guilt, not to every parent, but to a lot of them that are struggling already, I think. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on this.
That's really interesting, in as much that challenging the system on medical advice and the fact that sometimes you're not getting benefits or even benefiting from what your doctor is suggesting that your child. Karen, can I bring you in here, because there's a really interesting point that Debbie brought up, which was diets running families, and now I know you've got a big family, and I think that's quite true, isn't it? Diets running families, and what's your experience from a global perspective, because you live in different countries and you've seen different diets and different food systems, and have you changed the diets for children as you've travelled, and how does a diet run for a family?
Yeah, I guess for me, Arthur, I shared with you yesterday that I had my children relatively young, and I hadn't really thought too much about the process of anything really to do with having kids, but particularly to do with food. So when it came to childhood nutrition, I just went with what I'd been raised with, and we'd been raised on a very farm to table diet, growing up in sort of on the outskirts of city Melbourne. And I was taught to scratch cook as a child from my mother and my grandmother. So that's what I emulated with my kids. I just kind of went with the philosophy, well, if I read a packet and I can't pronounce it, then I probably shouldn't eat it, and I don't want my kids eating it. So most of their diet has predominantly been whole foods as they are grown or sourced. A really good point, living in different cultures. We've lived in 5 different countries and traveled to many, many more, and amazing experiences. And we have been able to taste phenomenal foods from all over the world, which has been a huge blessing. Have we changed our diet? We've definitely added dishes to our diet. But one thing that I've done ever since they were little is cook one meal. I'm not into cooking multiple meals for multiple different palates, but with 6 people in the house, that doesn't always go down well. So I introduced the concept, well, let's have a menu, a weekly menu, and everyone gets to pick a dish for 6 of the 7 days of the week. And 1 day a week is family night, where one of the adults chooses. And then you know that your meal is always coming. So the one that you've chosen is coming up. If you don't like the one that you're eating tonight, that's kind of too bad. You don't criticize it because yours is coming. That's one thing I've always done. Every country we've lived in, I've always tried to make food fun. So we've had, for years when they were little, for a good 10 or 12 years, we had Fun Friday, and Fun Friday was always themed. It's really hard to keep up themes for multiple years, but we'd have colour days. So it might be red day or blue day, and I'd put food dye in yogurt and all sorts of things. The kids ate it just because it was fun and it was a bit crazy, and we'd wear the same colour clothes. We'd have no hands meals. We'd have back to front day, where you eat breakfast for dinner and dinner for breakfast. Anything that I could do to make it fun and exciting, to create fun memories, but also just to get them excited about eating. They were all in the kitchen cooking from about 18 months old. And by cooking, I use the term loosely. There was a lot of broken items and utensils. But they all learnt that through those cooking experiences, what the terminology was. So they grew up learning terms like binding ingredients, proteins, vegetables, fruit. So they become regular part of their language, turn it into a competition. We had master chef nights. And in all of the different countries we've lived in, I've always tried to have lots and lots of kids in the home, have a very open home. And those children have been able to come in as friends of my children and experience, this is a vegetable. And I'm not kidding, Arthur. The classic experience of living in the US, in very south of the US, small children up to the age of 12 coming into my home and going, that's not a potato, arguing with me, that's not a carrot. And potato comes out of a little plastic sachet called Deb. And I'm like, how is this actually? I thought that was a joke. Some of the other things that we've done, nude food. Kids love anything to do with nudity. So if you can have nude food, which basically means not coming out of a wrapper, but anything you can do to make it fun. I'll stop there.
Well, just a point there, Karen, because it's really interesting, because what it is you're doing there is you're shaping children's lives with food. And Patricia, yesterday you made a really nice point, is that you're shaping your child's life and body through food. And I thought it was a really nice sentence to say that what it is that you feed your child, turns them into what it is that you're giving them as food. Would you like to stretch that conversation?
In which perspective? Chef perspective or mom perspective? Even though we are kind of chefs as a
chef mom, but let's talk about it from a mum first, and then from a chef, because I think this is really good, because this is the Chef's Manifesto, and there's some chefs involved here. So providing food as a chef to shape children's lives, but also as a mother.
As a mom, for me, it was a huge impact. Yesterday I mentioned as well that I felt more forced to learn and to know what I should do to help my child to develop very well and be a good influence in his life. And you make my question, is that really hard? It sounds a hard task to do. And I think it's very pleasurable. And because you see as the year passes as a mom, you follow it, they're growing. Now Ben is 6. and he make his choice, because I can see in that I had to challenge my family, my husband's family, the system, the school, like with my packet crazy lunches that sent to him. And it was tough when I had to do that, but I could see that now he's 6. He can say for himself, he has a voice, and he does say, I don't eat that. The other day at the school, they want to give him ice cream, and he said, you need to call my mom and ask her if I can have it, because I can just have ice cream twice a week. Yeah. And they're like, I'm sure she's gonna like, yeah, no, but I wouldn't. And people would think, oh my God, this child is having a pressure. But I explained to him why we're not having so much ice cream. It's not that he can't have it, but that's the thing. I explained him, I talked to him what the food gonna do for you, and the good and the bad, and where it comes from. And this, you can see that he makes the choice, not because, oh, I really want it, but because he makes the choice because I know he's very little, but he has a bit of conscience there that already is telling him that's the right thing. It makes sense. And I can see that when he talks to other people, and not in a bossy way, but you can just see he's respecting the nature design, that they're made of. And I think it's not even shaping them, it's allowing them to be what they are. They're already this. And we are giving like junk food and not learning more about the food system and sharing that with them, and what the nature is itself. We are nature, food is nature. I think we actually then shaping it wrong. We're not allowing them to just be what they already are. I think we just having a bad intervention, really.
Debbie, when we talk about food shaping people's lives, you're a vegan, and you've made a choice to eat vegetables over meat, and how do you then shape your child's life and how they interact with their friends, or how you interact with people at school, and have you struggled with not having meat in your children's life? Can we talk a little bit about, we'll come back to plant-based as well, Patricia, a little bit around plant-based teaching that you do. But Debbie, what issues have you found coming from a vegan standpoint? I think it's interesting.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, actually, because I should point out that I actually did feed both of my children with sort of a standard Western diet. They ate meat, eggs, they ate everything, obviously not dairy, because my choice is for me, and I want to do what's right for them. The reason that I then moved to my children's diet was because I could see it for them, maybe not for everybody, for them it wasn't benefiting them, and actually they are thriving now, being plant-based and having whole foods and being packed with nutrition. Feeding their gut microbiome. We know that fiber is important. There's more, more vegetables you eat, more fiber you have. And as we're having play dates and other children coming back to our house, I think the best way that I introduce them to this kind of way of living is to give them something, first of all, that they recognise. I've got a brownie recipe that I tend to give at play dates. That doesn't sound very healthy because it's a chocolate brownie. It looks like a chocolate brownie, it tastes like a chocolate brownie, and it smells like one. But it's made with dates, sweet potato, kidney beans, lots and lots of things you don't associate with brownies. And I had kids going back and speaking to the parents and saying, please, can you get this recipe? And I'm giving it to the parents, and they're going, sorry, what is this? What? This isn't a brownie. It's what they're eating. So I think the way that I made sure that my children didn't feel ostracized, and especially because obviously my children take a packed lunch to school. I like to make their lunch look colourful, vibrant. I like to add something baked in there because the way that I do it, obviously I'm sneaking nutrition all the time. And instead of children looking at my children's lunch and saying, oh, it's vegan, or oh, it looks disgusting and healthy, they're asking to try it. I've got parents going, oh, so-and-so, try this part of your child's packed lunch because they gave it away, and now they really would like to have it. So I think to change hearts and minds, I just think it's food presentation is really important, but I think also you have to show that healthy food shouldn't be associated with something that is disgusting or something that you have to eat in order to then yourself a dessert or something. Yeah, and so I think behavioural psychology is a massive part of this, and it's something I'm quite interested in.
Karen, quickly, when we've got Chef Patricia, who looks at not being entirely vegan but does have some meat in her diet, and then Debbie being vegan and being able to bring her children up without meat in their diet. But what's been your approach because I think it's understanding, because society's changing, more people have got different diets now. How have you brought, and what sort of tips have you got for bringing either meat or vegetables into your children's diet?
Yeah, we've definitely changed, Arthur, as my knowledge and awareness has grown and increased. Originally, we're a traditional meat protein family. That's what I knew, that's what I'd grown up with, and that's what I understood. But in recent years, as my awareness of better for people, better for planet, is a diverse diet of plants predominantly, and coming from a country that overconsumes meat protein, and knowing that meat protein could be best utilized in other parts of the world where that may be required more. I've made the decision for myself to no longer consume meat proteins. And we've moved to a more, the children have moved to 4 to 5 days a week. They would eat a plant-based diet predominantly. I don't know what they eat with their own money. 3 of them have jobs now. At home, we've definitely shifted. And sometimes the country that you live in really guides and shapes the diet. In the US, living in Texas, it's a meat state. They're known for their longhorn cattle, and it's very hard to find, especially if you're eating out in a restaurant, food that isn't very meat heavy protein. But we have always cooked predominantly at home. Going out is a huge treat, and something that I instilled in them years ago. The very first time we ever went on a holiday where we weren't cooking, like camping or something like that. It was a resort style place. And I decided for the first few days just to let the kids just have at it. They've never done anything like this before. And it's kind of a sociological experiment and see what they do. And one of them just ate anything white or beige for the first 3 days. And by about day, it was like white bread, white pasta, white cheese, white fries. And by about day 4, he wasn't very well. So years and years ago, we introduced this concept of 5 colors on the plate, but great if you can find 8. And it became this almost like this competition that if you were out and we're eating in a restaurant, who can pick the dish on the menu that's got 5 different ingredients that are going to be 5 different colors, and who can find 8. It's phenomenal how difficult that can be when eating out in a restaurant. When we lived in the UK, our diets shifted slightly again. It became starchy foods is a lot more accessible in the UK and accessible all year round. And I started to really take notice of seasonal ingredients and looking at things that were being imported and thinking, why is this dominating the shelves in grocery stores when there are some amazing greens at this time of year, which I know are grown in the UK. When I was working in Mexico, we ate a slightly different diet again, and it was what was available. And the part of Mexico I was working in was a subsistence fishing community. So there was a lot of fish, but barely any vegetables. So I guess I've always tried to adhere to certain principles, like 5 on a plate, but great if you can find 8. But it very much has depended on the context and where we've been living.
But it sounds, Karen, that you're building in early positive habits around the food that your children are eating, because Chef Patricia, you're coming across and you're teaching and giving advice to people that are coming to you with chronic diseases. Can we open up a little bit about discussion about what a healthy diet would be? Because you're finding that people who come to you with an illness age 40 have built bad habits and won't change their habits from early on in their lives. They just built this habit inside them around food, and they can't break this habit. Can we open up the discussion about good food, healthy food, and disease?
I think it's much harder to teach an adult than teach a child. And that's why I think it's so important to start with the children. They very stubborn, and if you're younger, who are you to tell them what to do? So, but at the same time, what I feel in every case, if it's for children or adults, I just feel a huge disconnection. There is a disconnection. The idea of health food, it comes from, like Debbie was saying, oh, it's boring. And we don't get where it comes from because we love food so much, real food. But we kind of need to go like really from the bottom to really go what you're made of, you know, where we come from, you know, like we're going to repeat this term because I think it's really important to value and recognize and bring that to the table, which is the nature design, how we were made, what is good for us is actually what's already available there in nature. So you kind of have to remember what we're made of, where we come from. And a good exercise is go back to the childhood as well. Because when they're a child, they're not sick like them. Well, there's some kids, unfortunately, they come with some disease in a very early age. But most of them, they're a healthy child. And they develop this disease through their long, with his choice, then the long of their life. So that's when they kind of have a click. They go, oh, actually was my choices. And this choice, and it's quite emotional sometimes to talk about the subject, because people start to realize again where they come from, and they had all this healthy body, and they start to understand that actually it can be something interesting. But you feel, as Naomi was saying, in the school, when you bring all these new colorful meals in the school and the kids just go panic, you cannot do that with adults either. They will freak out. So you kind of go, and it's like teaching a child. You need to go through the beauty of having a new possibility of health. And yeah, I think it's literally doing the way back, grounding us to all actually life is, and how food can make you sick, or it can prevent, or it can heal. But it's not an easy job, I have to say.
Debbie, just quickly, we're being pushed for time because we've got another fabulous speaker to come on. But you know, the experience then of not always taking the advice from the medical profession when you know something in your gut needs to change with your children. So I think this is a really good point. And that chronic disease can come from early childhood habits that are developed through the family. I mean, we talked a bit earlier on about diets running in families. I think it's a really good point. So how do we break that? How do we break a poor diet running in a family and getting a child to be, I mean, maybe it's the school's job to get children to understand food better, a bit like William was doing earlier on, and say, well, this is a fresh plate of food. Build this into your life. We'll educate you in this way so that as you grow, maybe disease does not come into your life.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because I'm hopeful that the education children are being given in schools, even if they then, so they don't follow it, they go through a phase in, I don't know, their teens or whatever, where they just eat loads of junk food because they suddenly have their own money and they can do that. But at some point they're going to come back to that and think, okay, actually my health will start. Health seems to be sort of get more important to you as you get older. Children are quite hedonistic and it's kind of and almost kind of carefree and think, well, I feel fine and I'm running around and I've got energy and I'm healthy. So yeah, I guess being able to go against advice that you're given would be easier if, for example, you had a resource to go to, which is why I was saying I think it would be important to have nutritionists available in, for example, children's health centres or Sure Start, or wherever it is that people might need to go who can't afford to go and see a dietitian or a nutritionist privately. It's prohibitively expensive for a lot of people. if they had a resource they could go to, or even someone who's attached to the school that they could go and see and speak to, I think you get a lot more engagement, because you're doing, we're wanting to be educating the children, and we need the parents to get on board, because as we've heard today, consistency is important. And if children aren't having school dinners and they're having packed lunches, parents are completely in charge of what goes into their mouths. And I think also without any judgment, that they can just come and get advice, and you're welcoming and you're friendly, because food is very emotive. And I think we just need to approach it quite sensitively, but bring parents and carers in so that they are empowered to make their decisions for their children, and feel confident doing it.
Thank you, Debbie. And I appreciate that this panel could go on and we need to talk a lot deeper, but we've got a guest come in from America.
Let me share the experience I had in first-hand experience with the kids that arrive.
Yeah.
It would be quick just to say, I've seen that with my own eyes, and many times for 3 years. I had the opportunity to work in a summer holiday camp for these 3 years, and I had kids staying with us for 7 days, and kids that it was a plant-based camp, just to say, and I had kids that come, they like really used to junk food and be on their computers and playing games all the time, and they suddenly was completely nature intense, and they had to eat this plant-based food that this chef and others monitors was like guiding them to be more interested into. So they have to harvest their food, they would go foraging, and they had to eat this food. And what happened is that in the beginning, the first 2 days, they would have like they would be very resistant, quite moody, I would say. But the fact they were like really involved with the food process, going, harvesting the food, foraging the food, cooking the food, suddenly everything changes. It's quite magical what can happen when you take a child into a garden, or or to harvest their own food, or to plant their food, or cook their food. They start to feel so connected to it that they start to be interested. And by the end of 7 days, they love their vegetables. So when they say kids don't like vegetables, or it will be super hard work, maybe it's just the approach that we need to do. So I would like to say that kids, they do love vegetables so much. Got to share that.
Thank you very much. Okay, we do need to keep moving on. I'm terribly sorry, and I wonder if we could please, Mark, if you could join us. Thank you, Patricia and Debbie and Karen, for joining us. You're super mums. I know all mums are super, but you guys are super. And we talk about changing medical advice, understanding that chronic disease can come from poor diets early on. We need to challenge the system around us and understand that plant-based can be built into children's life without it being super negative or being considered to be super negative. But hi to Mark, because I appreciate you're going to have to sign off fairly soon. I know that you're starting early. Thank you so much for joining us, and I don't want to lose the chance to talk to you. Chef Mark Graham, the culinary director, are you able to unmute and unvideo?
Yes.
Hi, Mark.
Hey.
Please excuse us, we get so squeezed for time. Video.
No, Arthur. I'm just fascinated by this last conversation of moms and schools, and it's so humbling to listen to that perspective. And I'm even more inspired by the school that has this education program that's teaching kids how to cook, and it's very humbling. as much as working for Kellogg is really an incredible experience. Changing what we create to support food and nutrition moving forward is part of my task. And Arthur, you know this firsthand. And you've gotten an opportunity to come out to headquarters and see what we've created there. Kellogg is one of the original plant-based companies, and we, since the company was founded 114 years ago, are dedicated to children nutrition and school programming and educating children. It's been part of the infrastructure of the company since its inception. And we struggle on a day-to-day basis with feeding people all over the world, especially during this pandemic. Kellogg, as of recently, and has given almost 1 billion meals away in the last several decades. And by 2030, we will have given away something like 2 billion meals globally to organizations that need to feed people. And it's paramount in our work and our lives. And we're instrumentally working with school programs to not only educate children, but to create a social environment for children to have breakfast every morning. And there are enormous, enormous, enormous political challenges that are, in some instances, insurmountable. And especially the food program in the US, we talked about it earlier. There was a comment that was made about the surplus of food in the early 40s, but we have to remember, and so subsequently the USDA and the FDA were formed in the United States, but we have to remember why that surplus happened. So in the late 30s, there was the Dust Bowl in the United States, and there was enormous drought for several years. And the reason why the USDA and the FDA were formed were as a result of that drought. What happened was initially, the government felt at the time that they were not responsible for feeding children or feeding people in the US. And farmers were on their own and made it a very competitive market to grow food and sell ingredients. And subsequently, with the drought, the first year they noticed a small decline in academic success in the Midwest where the drought was. So a decline in academic success of around 10%. And then the second year of drought, that increased to about 20%. And then as of the third year, and this is when the government stepped in, was something like 40% decline in academic success. And that's when it hit major cities, the drought hit major cities. And so subsequently there were programs put in place. Those programs haven't really been revamped. And subsequently we're up against this giant political machine. And one of our panelists earlier talked about the structure of success in school feeding programs is motivated, number one, by money, right? And 18% or a low percent is about what it is we're creating for food and nutrition. So I'm so inspired by the conversations that we've had today. And I'm happy to answer some questions, Arthur. I know we had some questions you asked me to consider ahead of time.
Yeah, well, I'm interested in a number. I mean, I think I'm going to be gentle with the questions, Mark. It's been a long day already, but I think there's some interesting points because of your unique position as culinary director for Kellogg's. And I know that I've been out to your innovation kitchen, and it's been inspiring to understand how innovation can influence changing products. But is there a role that both you as culinary director and your chefs in your innovation kitchen need to play in promoting and supporting a healthy and nature-positive diet for children?
Yeah, well, it's definitely ingrained in our business and in our mindset for years. In the 114-year history of Kellogg, there's never been a culinary department. We have been first and foremost a nutrition science company. And we've created some foods that are actually good for people to eat. All Bran is a really good example of that. But in this day and age, All Bran is considered old person's food, right? How do we reinvent and revamp that? And so culinary is brand new. This is, we've only had the culinary program for 3 years. And we are in a world where I loved the comment earlier about one of our panelists talking about traveling all over the world and being in places of the world where it was difficult to eat a plant-based diet. And Texas is a really good example of that. So my role is really to help develop foods for the future. And this pandemic has opened up avenues of conversation. I'm trying to look at this as a silver lining. What are the positive things we can gain out of this awful situation the world was in? It's caused great poverty, and we still have 40 million people unemployed in the United States, and we're slowly coming back to life, but it's changed, and many independent restaurants have gone out of business. And how do we create foods for the future that not only taste good, but are really good for you to eat? We've developed a new food that we're introducing to Brazil, actually, that is based on this sort of whole grain stew. And it's such an enormous opportunity for us to not only discover how do we create foods that are good for people to eat and plant-based, but also are culturally specific. And introducing a bowl of grains to a country that doesn't really eat that way is enormous. The education curve is huge, regardless of how delicious the food might be. And so as the culinary director for the business, I came into the business fairly naive, thinking, oh, this will be a 3 to 5 years program, and you know, I can get something. And now I realize it's probably an 8 to 12 year program, right? Turning this company into a place where we're creating holistic foods for better health, and especially a focus around children's health, is an enormous challenge. And we're working on it. Our R&D departments globally are working on it. We are in conjunction with regulatory programs throughout the world. There's a global initiative coming out of the WHO to reduce sugar. We're aggressively addressing that program, or addressing that in our foods. But it's an enormous challenge.
Martin, because it's interesting as chefs, and quite a lot of them are still on the call here, and I appreciate you've probably got to jump off soon, but I just want to ask you an important question here. How can chefs, or specifically the chefs in your team, beat the growing addiction on this planet to salt, fat, and sugar that are perhaps more traditional diets? You know, that's a big question, but how can we do that?
Well, so there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Sugar, it actually works as a lubricant, and subsequently reducing sugar in our foods sometimes doesn't allow our manufacturing systems to work. And so what alternatives do we have in doing that? So the chefs of
lubricant. You mean a lubricant for the machinery to produce the food, or lubricant inside the body?
For the machine, for the dough to move through the machine. Yeah. And Arthur, you walked through our pilot plant when you saw these giant machines, and you know, we have manufacturing systems that operate 24/7, 365 days a year. Right now, as we are speaking in this forum, 350,000 people somewhere in the world are eating a Kellogg food. And we're making millions of pounds of Kellogg food as we speak. And so,
a huge responsibility to feed that many people within the time that we've just spent.
Oh my God. Well, and it's overwhelming, right? So as my little chef team, and our chef team is 9 people globally, as we have the ear and the eye of the executive committee and the board of directors, we're under a great deal of pressure to really open the eyes of this balance of taste good, good for you to eat, and nutritionally sound. And it's the dichotomy around food science and culinary is an enormous responsibility that I take very seriously. So we're working on it, right? My chef team is only in place for just under 2 years now. And so it's a slow moving but progressive mindset. We just presented some foods that are interesting to senior leadership, and we've gotten the green light to pursue them. So our role is to constantly experiment. And that's what we're doing, and putting those foods in front of our colleagues, and not just our colleagues in the US and headquarters, but shipping them around the world and putting those foods in front of all of our colleagues globally and talking about it. The only way we make impact is from a chef perspective that says, and in some instances, we have to say, this doesn't taste good. And we need to have a balance of nutritionally sound, plant-based, and delicious and craveable to eat. And I'm working on it. It's many of these wrinkles are a result of the last 3 years. Yeah.
We're trying to push this bus, right? We're saying, okay, we're going to use the Food System Summit. Listen to this. We're creating a dialogue in a couple of weeks' time on the 7th of July. Mark, if you're able to join us, that would be so fantastic, because obviously a big bus that needs pushing towards the UN Food System Summit around nutritious food for all, but also, you know, specifically for children. So have you got, like you say, it's a 8 to 12 year program. You've obviously got 10 years to go. I mean, are you planning ahead? I mean, what is it that you see?
Yeah, so my work is very future focused, and I have to jump because I have to make a presentation, actually the Future of Food report to our global marketing team this morning. So my work is breakthrough and transformational, and my work is 3 to 5 years out. And that includes experimentation with new ingredients. That means leaning on our strategic suppliers globally. We have to increase our access to supply chain, and we have to make sure that the foods that we're presenting represent a new face for Kellogg. And some of those foods are really encouraged. In the UK, we introduced a product line called WK Kellogg. No artificial ingredients, no sugar added, really incredibly good for you to eat. And we're expanding that portfolio now to other countries based on the limited success that we've had in England. But it's the progression forward is not necessarily driven by, it's driven by accessibility from a much different perspective. As much as I'm inspired by chef ingredients that are grown in a garden, the volume of work that we're on a busy night, we're not doing 1,000 covers in a restaurant. We're feeding a lot of people. And so in order to do that, we have to shift the mindset of the business to a place of, these are the better ingredients, not these ingredients. And we're getting there. We have the ear of the right people internally. And my job and my small team is to experiment with those ingredients and put them forward. And we're working on it.
Now, Mark Graham, thank you so much. It's culinary.
Pleasure to be here.
Really fabulous. Right, well, say good luck with your presentation.
Thank you.
We'll sign off quickly with you, Mark, and say hello to Paul. Thank you all for your patience. We're running slightly over time. We try to be on time with the Chefs Manifesto events, but they run over because we've got chefs speaking and everything they say is amazing. And all of the panelists, everybody, we've still got quite a lot of people here. So what I wanted to suggest, Paul, is we've got a number of chefs on board who might want to just open up this discussion a little bit more. But what I'd like to do quickly is sort of sign off on the official content and say, wow, what amazing 3 hours. It feels like 10 minutes. And thank everybody for their input. Thank you so much to Donald, Professor Donald Bundy, to Naomi, to Gay, to Jim, who had to jump off. Thank you to, I think, we've also lost Kath. So a number of people have jumped out, but we do have some chefs left over, and I think there are some points we'd like to make. But before we sign this off officially, I'd like to say that we are, this event was done to create a dialogue, and a dialogue for the United Nations Food System Summit, which on the 7th of July, we're hosting the dialogue via Omved Gardens. And we'd like to invite everybody who's on this call to do that dialogue, to actually think for the next couple of weeks what it is you just experienced, and say, okay, what is it that I want to say to the United Nations Food System Summit? And join us on the 7th of July, where we will facilitate little breakout groups, take all of your points, note them down, and send them to the United Nations Food System Summit with, kind of this official stamp. Hey, look, we've thought about this. We've had a great group of people come together and create some really important discussions. Paul, would you like to sum up? And perhaps we can just open up a quick dialogue with the chefs to say, from the manifesto perspective, what did we think? And anybody else who's just on the periphery of this, you're very welcome to just keep listening in and maybe jump in questions and put in a few Q&As. And thank you so much for your Q&A questions today. And hopefully we've answered as much as we could. But Paul, 3 hours.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, it's always very hard to summarize because, there's so many elements. And I think, the really critical thing, I think, that's key in these Action Hub conversations is to really bring in a diversity of opinions, to bring actors together. But at the same time, it feels like there's a connection between what people are saying. And so I think, at the moment with this food system summit happening, there's a real awareness and awakening in what are the connection points and what are the levers at the moment that we can drive change. And I think COVID's exposed and accelerated some of that challenge, because it's obviously made some of these things to do with our food system much more come to the fore. And also acknowledge that things like nutrition, has been raised in many places to sort of understand what the impacts are of malnutrition. And I think the connections that are coming together. And so I think this is a really key element. I think chefs have a very valuable role to play. And I think alongside other actors, advocates, activists, scientists, other actors, chefs can play a very important role in really advocating around what good food means and how to kind of really deliver that for all people. And starting at school is a pretty equalizer, because we all start out young and we all go through school. So it's this foundation in many ways. And I going back to what Professor Donald Bundy started with, this idea of really stuck with me about investing in education, but then not investing in the process of learning, but not in the learner. And I think, that investment in the person, and I know that's come up in our Chef Manifesto conversations about investing in chefs, and sometimes, the people cooking the food are not being invested in, they're not getting the being looked after in the way that they need to. And I think this is really, really important. And so, as we go into the dialogue, I think it's important to take some of these conversations, but also bring your own experiences. And we'd encourage you to invite others to the dialogue. Dialogues are meant to have a diversity of opinions. They're not meant to just be a group of chefs sitting in a room, but to have a diversity of experiences. So different types of chefs working in different types of places, other advocates, and really be able to drive that conversation. So this has been great. Thank you so much for coordinating, Arthur and Jen and the team at Omved, for just bringing it all together and really enabling this space to deep dive on these issues, I think is really critical.
Oh, it's been fascinating, and the discussions have, just started. There's so much to discuss. Right. Well, I thought because so this is an official goodbye. I think we've done lots today. I think it's been just the most brilliant set of panelists and guests and participants. But I do know that we've got Chef Connor, we've got Chef Morkadi, we've still got Chef Patricia. There's Gay and there's Debbie and a few other people here. Should we just open this up for just an open dialogue? Because I've got to jump off because I've had something arrive at my door. But what has today done for us? So goodbye to everybody. It's officially over. But if you want to hang on, let's just keep it going for a few more minutes, because I'd really like to bring in Chef Connor, Chef Morkadi. Just lift up your screens now, open up the discussion, remembering that we could have some people still participating externally. So if you're going to start going into chef mode, make sure we're not sharing, swearing, because we don't swear or do anything rude. But Connor, Morkadi, I'm just going to mute myself and close myself down for a minute. But what do you think? We've covered quite a lot of ground, haven't we? What do you think?
Well, for me, what stood out is the role of chefs in the school feeding programs. And I actually was so inspired by what everyone is doing, by chefs in schools, Food for Life, and all those programs, because they actually show in practicality what chefs can do. And for me, that's been my take, because I think, school feeding programs are key to, as we've seen, to food security, especially now for young kids, and also just going forward. That's the food that they eat at school is probably the main thing that they're eating. When they get home, most people don't have food. So school feeding programs are really important, but I loved how we can bring the chefs to be involved and be educators. So for me, that is one that has really moved me today.
Yeah, I thought we covered so much on it, and I think from what I do, from what I do here in Ireland, around corporate catering and contract catering and so on. And it was mentioned by Naomi and Gay earlier around procurement. And procurement is our biggest problem. And as I always say, it's follow the money. Don't forget that no matter what industry you're in, is it feeding kids in schools? Is it feeding people in restaurants, so on? There is a commercial side to every single thing. And following the money is the key to it. And what I have found, and why Food Space was born, was out of frustration of seeing what goes on in contract catering. And there's a dark side, there's an underworld to contract catering. And what I mean by that is, and let's talk specifically, say UK, Ireland, and so on, around school meals. And it was mentioned earlier, like that large companies come in, they tender for these businesses, and they can be large. They could be entire boroughs where I think Naomi mentioned it was like a £20 million contract had just gone out and no one else had tendered for it, so on. This entire contract base is very competitive and it's built on money. It's not built, and they will tell you that 10% or 50% of the contract is awarded on sustainability, or it's awarded on flavor, or it's not. I've been there, and that's why we built Food Space. It's built on money. And what happens is when you get down, you'll whittle down competitions, you could have 5, 6 companies would start, and you might end up with 3. And you're told you're the last 3 in this competition. Who's going to win it? And you have big companies come along. I've seen companies come with a bag of money with over €500,000 or pounds and go, we will give all your schools brand new ovens and kitchens if you give us the contract. And they win the contract. And what happens, you think these companies are giving this money away for free? Of course they're not. What happens is the procurement then kicks in. And to make back the money that they've already invested and also to run a commercial business, they then sell cheap food, cheap ingredients that's procured at the cheapest amount. It's regardless of where it's come from. It's regardless of where it's traveled from. And this is what's fed back to our kids, purely on a competitive basis. And then to get a higher margin, because any of these companies need to be in double digits in profit to cover their overheads. So to get a higher margin, then they tie in with corporations. So for instance, they will go to Coca-Cola and they will say, we will only sell Coca-Cola products if at the end of the year, you give me back a backhander. So if I spend 100 grand with you, you give me back 10 grand at the end of the year. Coca-Cola go, yes. Then they'll go to someone else and go, we will use all your bouillons, or we will use all your pasta, or we will use all your tomato sauce. If at the end of the year, we spend X amount with you, you give us back a rebate. And they go, yes. So they tie in these large corporations so they get money in the back door to make up for the money that they give to the school to win the competition to give out cheap food. And until that ends, school dinners will not move on from what they are unless we can clone William in Highgate National School. He needs to be cloned and put into all these schools because he made a personal choice as a headmaster not to accept what was going on. But this is what is going on. I've witnessed it, and we, as in, thank God, Food Space have changed that and are still continues to change it here in Ireland, not in the UK. But there's an underside, and unfortunately, it is about following the money. It's all based on money. It's not based on kids' nutrition. It's not based on how well we can feed them, even though you will be told it is. It's not. It's purely commercially based. And that's unfortunately the sad facts. And as I always call the underworld behind contract catering. So there's a lot to be done. We all want to see these changes, but until that end, the procurement end, and how councils and boroughs and how the contracts are awarded, until that changes, these large companies will not change their systems because their systems are built on winning these competitions or tenders on that basis. And that to me is a huge problem with education on kids and food.
We can't hear you.
Now? Yeah.
Yeah.
Connor, that's so serious because there are some schools, they're not even allowed you, they don't give you the choice of sending a packed lunch to your child. You're obligated to eat their food. That when I started looking for schools and nurseries for Ben, I was shocked. I'm like, are you taking away my right of feeding my child in the way I believe because your menu is crap? And you could just visiting this school, you could see so many kids with running nose, some hashes in their skin, and we work with food and we know that's poor diet. And yeah, I think, well, the times in the world are quite intense, and there's the lack of compassion is zero. The money is really taking over. But at the same time, I think we're raising our voice, and we got to, as individuals of the world, we got to talk about it. And that's what I also did at school. I was very impressed. Like, how are you taking my right? I did say that because I was very shocked, and they were shocked because I was like really shocked with the whole situation. But thank you for sharing. It's really it's not a nice thing to hear, but
I don't mean it in a negative way. I believe change will happen, but what we have to do is collectively get our voices to change at a government level. These are government level programs globally that runs food within schools and education, that is run on a competitive basis, and that there lies the problem. And until we collectively, as parents, as chefs, as just people, push our voices back to governments and legislation measures to be changed, that is the beginning of change in food and education, because that then brings in people that want to cook and and don't have a procurement machine juggernaut behind them, telling them you can only buy this, telling them you must only use it. That's all gone, and then people can actually produce proper, real, nutritious food. So I do mean it in a positive way. I'm not talking in a negative. I mean that what we are doing here today and so on is so important. It's the start of change.
It is what it is. You're just sharing that. I appreciate it very much. It would be lovely if Naomi was here as well, just to share with us how it's for them, like, to get their food, and you know what the chef's facing as well. But I think she's gone, isn't she?
Sorry, guys, I had to.
Yeah, Naomi's gone. Yeah.
Sorry. So what do we think today? Hello, Ben. How are you, mate?
How's it going, guys? All right?
Very good to see you.
Thanks, you too. It's been
a moment here, Ben and I. We spent a lot of time together. How are you, man? You all right?
Yeah, really good, really good. It's been really interesting, and thanks a lot for inviting me along today. I've been actually making chili jam while listening to a lot of this, but some really interesting points, particularly Chef Connor Spacey with the last point that you mentioned, and I think I mentioned this something similar on the comments earlier, that unfortunately the real hard fact of it and the ugly fact of it is that money does seem to make the world go round. And I know so many people, particularly from the backgrounds that I'm from. I come from a single parent family, 3 other siblings, you know, so things were a little bit tight growing up. You know, some weekends we had corned beef sandwiches, Saturday and Sunday, you know, for dinner, because that was all that mum could rustle together, sort of thing. And then having joined the Jamie Oliver course for sort of, you know, underprivileged or people who wouldn't have otherwise had the opportunity to become a chef or go through that sort of level of training. And then sort of that was 20 years ago now, so more than half of my life. I'm nearly 38 now. So that kind of plays a really big part in my life. I always remember where I've come from to sort of achieve where I think I need to get to, and the fact that I was provided the opportunity to learn to feed myself, those around me, and to actually just delve fully into the world of food, from source to, you know, sauce going over the top sort of thing, from where it starts to where it ends kind of thing, and everything in between. And like you said, you know, a lot of it does seem to, you know, I've met a lot of people who really want to do good things for other people, for their local communities, for their communities as a whole, and just to try and make the world a better place. You know, if we look after the few people around us, chances are our life's going to improve. And it's a pretty simple science. But unfortunately, we all seem to be so caught up in the sort of ego of everything, you know, the flashy symbols and the advertising and the marketing, and, oh, am I keeping up with this trend? Am I keeping up with that trend? And we all need to be able to sustain ourselves. We still need to be able to try to afford a mortgage and pay for, you know, our children's school trips and things like that. And unfortunately, it always seems to be that, you know, working for the bad guys pays the most money, and you know, we might not be driven by greed, but at the end of the day, we all need to have a certain amount of self-sustainability, to be able to, like you say, pay our bills and stuff like that. And a lot of the things that seem to be able to allow you to help other people don't seem to pay, and you have to end up taking a financial sacrifice personally to achieve those things. And the people who want to help often are less driven by money, but to some degree it's got to meet halfway, you know, or some of the way. And I think that's one of the problems that I've always had with trying to start something up or trying to do something different to help other people.
There's a point though, Ben, that's interesting one, that quite a lot of the big companies nowadays have struggled to connect to what was a guaranteed clientele over the past 25 years. Now, okay, big companies, we've got people who buy our products, so we don't really care. Now, I know for a fact that big companies are panicking now because they're realizing that society is changing, people's ideas on the planet and how they feed themselves is changing. And so they're having to rush to catch up, and they're having to listen to the new food systems, the new things that are being put into place by chefs. Chefs like Mokadi, chefs like Connor, chefs like Patricia, chefs like yourself, and appreciate that maybe right now we're not getting paid to do the work that we're doing or to make the statements that we're making. But big companies are scrabbling around for change. And so it's the change makers, it's the disruptors, it's the people who are doing things differently, like making banana peel jam. I know it doesn't seem like much, but when you're making that banana jam, Connor, and it's using up the waste scraps of bananas, big companies are looking at this saying, oh, I need to be inspired by this. And I think someone made a point earlier on about companies, when something is said that's so obvious. I think it was Nestle. Did you say it, Debbie, earlier on about Nestle being told something so obvious that suddenly you kind of go, God almighty, yeah.
It wasn't me, but it certainly was very obvious. Yeah. I can't remember who it was, I'm afraid.
Yeah. And the fact that, the ways that we communicate. Sorry, who said that?
Kath, Arthur.
Who said it?
Kath.
Kath. Oh, Kath. Okay, sorry for the Jamie Oliver. Yeah, so, it was just the fact that, big companies are listening. And I know it's frustrating, Ben. And as chefs, we just have to keep hammering at the coalface, like, we need change, we need change, we need change.
One of the things that I've done is I started up I wanted to start my own company serving food. I live in Cornwall now, which is down the southwest of England. Cornwall, as opposed to London, where I was brought up and have lived for most of my life, is not very diverse with regards to culture. It's very, very English, very, very white, very sort of, you tend to find you've got your pizza places, your burger places, your fish and chips, but there wasn't really much outside of that. And I wanted to sort of bring Caribbean food and the flavors of Caribbean food and actually the culture as well to this sort of neck of the woods. So that was kind of how I started up my company, and basically started it with literally no budget. I got a tax rebate of 400 quid, bought some ingredients, started making some chili jerk, sort of Jamaican style flavored sauce jam, and it just sort of went from there. And now we've got a Caribbean sort of restaurant outlet. We're open Thursday, Fridays and Saturdays, but we provide affordable meals. So we want people to be able to come and eat in a restaurant that wouldn't necessarily be able to afford to eat in a high street restaurant and pay 15, 16, 17 pounds a head, because that's a very one-sided thing. And also kind of now it sort of reflects a little bit like, where I'm from. So the old me growing up would be able to afford at the place where I'm cooking now. So people are actually getting a high quality level of food. We're using great ingredients. We've got zero wastage policy, and we give out any of our wastage that we have left over. We give it to the local community and invite people up to come and eat for free. But little bits and pieces like that can eventually sort of pave the way to be able to become bigger. And then when we kind of build everything that we build, we take 25% away and we put it to one side in a little pot. And that's what we use for our community outreach projects. So we're starting sort of community cooking projects to show people how to use ingredients that they can get hold of cheap or free, or locally grown, or things that are easy to grow in this area. And I think that's kind of what we really need on a bigger level, really, rather than waiting for bigger corporations to sort of catch up to the idea. We need to start doing our own thing in our own communities, and then obviously meeting up in places like this where we can all kind of come together and share ideas and share views, and then just make it bigger and get the kind of collective going a bit more, I suppose.
Well, Ben, the Chefs Manifesto is a pretty serious group, and there's lots of chefs involved, and having you in it is just going to be amazing. I really appreciate your feedback. So, look, we've been through nearly 3.5 hours, really solid content, and nutrition, children's health, and how the Chefs Manifesto and the action tracks from the UN Food System Summit can kind of trigger that kind of stuff. This is a conversation that we're going to come back to on the 7th of July. And as chefs, it'd be wonderful if even this group could come together as either facilitators or just get into each group inside the dialogue to say, well, this is the direction that chefs need to be taking. This is the direction and the points that we've made a few weeks back, because there's some really solid stuff that came out of today. And in a way, we're going to have to go over the recording, apart from the children's school recording, but everything else. Some of the content, I haven't been able, because I'm facilitating, I can't really listen because I'm having to get a broader view of it. But if you could bring back some of your thinking on this on the 7th of July, I'd really appreciate it. If we can get this to the Food System Summit, you know, this is a winning opportunity. And just to finish off, what did we think about the opening gambit from Professor Donald Bundy? You know, what a subject he's able to bring, right?
Yeah, he made some very interesting points actually, and I made some notes on it so that I didn't forget, like I have done now. So he talked a little bit about sort of rich countries and sort of less rich countries, and about resources and where food comes from. And I kind of made a little note about that, just thinking to myself that when we talk, sometimes the language that we use is very sort of apparent that we're not sort of thinking along the same lines. So when we say a rich country, what do we mean by rich? Do we mean rich in terms of wealth, or do we mean rich in terms of resources? You know, and he actually talked about under-resourced countries. And interestingly enough, we get a lot of our, you know, the wealthier countries in the world, or the more developed countries in the world, get a lot of their resources from a lot of the underdeveloped countries. So that's a very interesting just thing in and of itself. And I think that when we talk about education, I think we need to look at the way we teach our children and each other, and the way that the language that we use affects our behavior and affects what we do. Because everything's been kind of, especially, I mean, I'm talking about for us in the sort of Western world, if you like, everything is geared very, very much towards commerce, towards consumerism, and within that comes the same big business that we've been talking about. But obviously, you know, like I sort of mentioned in one of the comments, with the way I try to sort of raise my children is that obviously there's lots of different influences in the world nowadays, but if I can try to get them to be a good person, to be a kind person, and to look after other people, then I think that we're in the right sort of place. And if everybody has that kind of idea, then we'd definitely be moving in the right direction. It was interesting how he talked about a lot of the sort of scientific and sort of social scientific studies that have gone into what we define as sort of food education or health education, gut health, you know, bits and pieces like that. So there's no reason why, I suppose, us as chefs or innovators can't start to create products that will promote those types of things. You know, I think one of the ladies mentioned earlier, I think it was the Australian lady, I can't remember her name. She mentioned about, I think it was Patricia who mentioned about the ice cream. You mentioned about the ice cream, your children having the ice cream in school, and they mentioned they weren't allowed to have it. But you know, you can make ice cream can be made in a healthy way, you know, sorbet and bits and pieces like that with, you know, natural sugars. And I've even found in sort of research, there's a product, a type of berry, which it simulates when you have this type of berry with food, it makes you taste sweetness in things that aren't necessarily there. So it's like a sugar sort of replacement. And again, you know, that's something that's out there, and it just kind of takes a couple of people to kind of bridge the gap and then start doing something with it. So I suppose by constantly communicating like this, it kind of, yeah, brings us into a good light. Very, very sort of interesting points. Yeah.
Now, what I love, sorry to brush across this, I'm so behind time on another meeting. I've got someone sitting with me here, and he's. But what I do want to do is give everyone a chance to have a final piece to say. I know it's been great, Debbie, to have you, and Mokadi to have you dialed in today. In fact, Mokadi, did anything really ring untrue for you today? What did you feel? Did we get everything right, or from a chef, did we say the right things, or did we cover everything, or not everything?
Well, I think, you know, we did cover everything. I learned a lot today, but mostly from Professor Bundy, Donald Bundy, when he talks about the first 8,000 days, and how a lot of the emerging countries like South Africa, for instance, where I'm from, suffer from obesity. That for me, because we live with obesity and food insecurity, so and stunting and all that. So malnutrition and obesity live together here in South Africa. So for me, it's very interesting to see how we as chefs can play a part there. So me to learn about the programs that are out there that are already doing that. I mean, in South Africa, for instance, we don't have our tender system around the food school feeding programs come from the government. So the government does all the procuring. So I think, you know, we don't have big caterers running the school feeding program in terms of that, but only in private schools. So the government still has an opportunity really to make a change. So we're not where you guys are yet around having big caterers taking charge of what kids can eat. The government is still in charge of that. And what they're working on now is to include indigenous crops into the school feeding programs, because those indigenous crops are good for the earth, but they're also nutrient dense. So it's very interesting to see what the program going forward is. And one of the things that has come out now around the food systems dialogue that South Africa held is including those indigenous crops as you know, as a way to fortify foods that don't have enough nutrients or are not healthy. So for me, it's interesting what the role of chefs and what we as chefs can bring to the table, because it's, you know, for South Africa, this is key because a lot of people really suffer from malnutrition and obviously obesity. Yeah. So it's very interesting. I absolutely enjoyed today's, and I've also learned a lot. So I'll definitely be tuning in on the 7th.
Come and take part. We need you to take part, Mukadi.
Yeah, no, I'll be there. I definitely will be there.
Debbie, what did you think today?
I mean, first of all, thanks for having me, because I found today so fascinating, and hearing everybody's different perspectives, and listening to chefs as well. I've never spoken to a chef. I don't know how things work in schools from that angle, and it's really interesting. And I think everybody kind of coming together with an experience from all sides is what's going to make this achievable, even if it's a very long-term goal. It is achievable if you're hitting it from all angles. So I was very impressed with today, especially the content.
Thank you. I really appreciate you taking part. Patsy, I'm so sorry we didn't manage to cover as much as we wanted to talk to. You know, you see how the time goes so fast. You have to be like you have to say what you need to say and then move along, because otherwise your time just goes boom.
That's fine.
So
for the next one, but
yeah.
it was amazing. I was hugely inspired listening for all the different areas in the food industry, and leading with nutrition for kids. And I think for everyone here today, it was so much to from now on be thinking more on and be able to make these notes and send to the summit, because as you said, it's an opportunity that we have. We all have a lot to say. We heard a lot, and I think when we combine them, all this information together and have this opportunity to share and claim for this help that we all need, I think it's amazing. I'm very excited about 7th of July as well.
Cool. Ben, you must join us on the 7th of July and give us your opinion. We need you in one of the breakout sessions. So, and it's going to make a big impact. Every voice is heard, you know.
Yeah, I've just checked. It's a Wednesday, so I'll definitely be around. Yeah.
Look, I've got to sign off, guys. It's been so long. I'm quite drained, but I've also got to go into another long week. So there's a few of us left. Appreciate you being involved. And we've still got some attendees. Wow. Thank you, everyone, for holding on and being a part of this. Wonderful to have your time. But I'm signing off. Therefore, I assume, because otherwise I don't facilitate, and you guys can start talking about mad stuff, and then people think we're not mad. It's been a pleasure to host today. Thank you to participants and the panelists, attendees, etc. Thanks for